I was a soldier in a Russian army. I was conscripted in the summer of 2021. My mother was really worried about me. She really wanted for me to attend a university, but we didn't have any money to pay for it. Plus I never had good grades in school, so getting to university was a problem. I was terrified of the army. Everybody heard about beatings and hazing, much more when you are told you are going to be motor rifleman. After finishing young soldier course, I was assigned to a motor rifle regiment. I'm not going to say a location, but let's just say it was very close to Belarus. In November 2021, the motor rifle regiment that was assigned to was sent to participate in the exercise in Belarus, right by Ukrainian border. Our commanders kept telling us that there will be no war, that this is only an exercise to deter Ukrainians. We were told that NATO is training new Nazi gangs in Ukraine, so later on they can invade Russia and Belarus. Of course it was bunch of nonsense, but everyone believed it. We lived in the tents in the horrifying conditions. When there were high winds, tents would collapse. When there was heavy rain, it would flood everything. We didn't have showers, or any way to clean our clothes. Food was scarce. Towards the end of February we were told we're about to go back to Russia, back to our garrison, but on the night of February 23rd, right after celebrating Armed Forces Day, we were given a bucket of white paint and white armbands. Our commander told us to draw letter Z on our BTR. We departed early in the morning of 24th February, heading into Ukraine. We were driving to the border guard post that was completely demolished by caliber missile strike. All that was left were ruins and burning remains of vehicles belonging to Ukrainian border guards. It felt exciting but scary at the same time. We saw a sign on the road pointing us towards Kiev. We have won yet to see any kind of resistance. We thought we won and this is going to be easy. We drove the whole day, watching Ukrainian civilians flee in the area. I occasionally hearing pop shots. I witnessed the car full of civilians being shot at by a BMP-3, killing everybody inside just because they didn't stop. I didn't think anything of it. It's war, right? We were driving very slowly, trying to look for any signs of Ukrainian armed forces, but there were none. Towards the end of the first day, I'll call him, the vehicles came to halt. I overheard on the radio, the forward unit ran into an ambush. There were a bunch of screaming on the radio and you could hear explosions out in the distance. It didn't take long for artillery to respond. They were blessing entire area for about 2 hours before everything turned quiet. When sun came up we kept moving. We drove by the side where ambush happened. About 15 vehicles had been completely burned down, some of the crews inside. When I saw soldiers pulling burned down remains of their buddies not have burned down vehicles, my heart dropped. It could have been me, could have been any of us, but yet we kept moving. We finally stopped to get refueled. After that we kept moving, until the column came to hold again. Again I heard a firefight out in the distance. Artillery and aviation were trying to take care of the threat, but it kept going all night. With the firefight going out in the distance, everybody still felt very relaxed, like Victor is going to come at any moment. But this time we didn't end up moving. Our commander kept kicking us out of the vehicle, having a patrol the woods near the highway to make sure there were no Ukrainian special forces getting ready to ambush us. There was nobody. We went back to our vehicles, turned on the heater and went to sleep. In the morning we kept on waiting and we kept hearing explosions up ahead. Ukrainians were fighting hard. They weren't going to simply surrender. It went on like that for 3 days, was simply just sit there on the road. Finally we started receiving incoming artillery fire. It was inaccurate at first, but then it started coming closer and closer. Finally the command decided to set up some kind of defense. We formed a semicircle in the wood line by the road. We started digging in. As we were digging in we started receiving more incoming fire. At night a Ukrainian drone destroyed couple of vehicles from 1st Company. This time we could see it. Commander told us that nobody died, but you could hear the screams that slowly faded away. We stayed like that for a couple of days. Eventually, Ukrainians figured out that we had nowhere to move. Every night we begun to receive indirect fire from Ukrainian artillery. And they were getting better and better every day, more accurate and more deadly. We began taking casualties. But for some reason we were still not moving. Finally, we started to move again. This time regiment broke up into battalion tactical groups. As battalion tactical groups begun moving towards Kiev, we broke up into our respective companies and continue movement. We were moving slow. I wish I could say it was deliberate, but it was not. We were trying to move southeast to cut off a Ukrainian brigade, in order to envelop it. But as we found out later, they were doing the same thing. And they were much faster at it. My battalion tactical group ended up trapped, but we didn't know that yet. We just kept moving. First week of March, Ukrainians finally got a good hit on us. It begun with a javelin strike in our first tank in the column. as well as the last vehicle, blocking our entire company. We didn't see any Ukrainian infantry, but we figured they were nearby. As we were blocked, Ukrainian artillery and aviation begun to carpet bomb the portion of a highway we were on. It was so intense that most of us just stayed on a truck hoping it doesn't get hit. Ukrainians were shooting about every 30 minutes, after every barrage we would lose a vehicle. It was terrifying. Eventually we dismounted our trucks and ran into a wood line. From there we watched Ukrainian artillery, finishing off rest of our convoy. Now we were in our own. Our company commander died in the airstrike. We couldn't even locate his body. There were no officers left alive. During last Ukrainian artillery barrage, I dropped my weapon and ran straight into your wood line, and they just kept running and running until I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed from exhaustion, and I realized that none of my platoon mates kept up with me. Now was completely by myself with no food or water. I started walking around, looking for them. I was trying to be quiet because I was afraid there were Ukrainian patrols looking for us. So I kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. If you're from Ukraine, you know that woods around Kiev are very ancient. There's a lot of myths were born there. Some of them were just complete nonsense, but I wasn't thinking about it at the moment. All I could think about was getting back to my unit or what's left of it. I filled up my cantina with some snow, waiting for it to melt so I can drink some water, but I had no food. Well, they say you can survive a month without food, except nobody said it was going to be easy. I will try to get some sleep at night and move during the day. Jacket was completely soaked. I had several liters of water in my boots. I was exhausted and hypothermic. Finally I went so deep inside the woods that I couldn't hear anything, just birds singing. All of a sudden they got warmer, like a lot warmer. All the snow around me seemed like it melted. All of a sudden I noticed some mushrooms, grown by a tree. It was a very strange tree. It was almost like it didn't belong there. It was a bird street growing out in the open field. It was a bit of a strange sight, but I was so hungry I didn't care. I ripped the mushrooms out of the ground and shoved them in my mouth. I found another cluster of mushrooms and I did the same thing. I leaned against the tree trying to relax. I started dozing off. Suddenly something jerked me out of my sleep. When I opened my eyes, there was a lady standing there. She looked like a horror movie character. She had a gray hair that looked like she didn't wash it for weeks. Her clothes was ripped to pieces. She was just standing there, and looking at me. When I took a closer look, I realized that her eyes are completely white, like she was blind for decades. Chills started running up and down my spine. She terrified me. "What do you want, lady?" I asked her. She didn't respond. She just kept looking at me with lifeless eyes. "Who are you and what do you want?" I asked her again, but just like before, she just stood there. Although her eyes were completely white, I could feel her stare. It was penetrating. Suddenly, a feeling of guilt started to overwhelm me. "I'm sorry, lady. I didn't want to come here. They made me do it. Again, you just stood there." I decided to stand up. To my surprise, despite my exhaustion, I was able to quickly get up on my feet. I was trying to look away from her, but I could feel her stare. Out of nowhere I started crying. I don't know why, I just wanted to. Suddenly the lady to the right of where she was standing, she started walking facing her back towards me. For some unknown reason I wanted to follow her really bad. When I watched her walk, I realized that she wasn't really walking, it was more like she was floating. After walking for about 10 minutes, we arrived at some random village that looked like it was abandoned a long time ago, and what I saw there terrified me even more. I saw about 5 or 6 children, standing there looking at me with the same white eyes. What the hell is going on here, I thought. I began weeping. I couldn't stop crying for some reason. Children were dressed in modern clothes covered in dried out blood. They were just standing there and looking at me. I still didn't realize what it was. Old lady stood right next to them. I dropped on my knees and kept crying. Something inside of me was telling me that they meant no harm, but it didn't matter to me. Suddenly, children started to move closer to me. I dropped down on the ground and curled up. They came up to me and were looking right at me, with the same dead look in their eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, I didn't want to come here, I didn't kill anybody, you don't understand, I didn't have any choice," I begged. They started to touch me with their cold hands, was even more terrifying. I could feel their cold little hands. The cold of their hands was penetrating my full jacket. I kept crying and begging, until I couldn't do it anymore and I just stopped, accepting my fate. Suddenly, I heard kids' laughs and screams, like they were playing. I opened my eyes and I saw kids running around. Their eyes looked normal, their clothes looked like they wasn't torn to pieces, they were just playing with each other. The old lady back the whole time, staring at me. The kids started to move away from me, I felt feeling of peace and happiness as I looked at them. They started to disappear in a fog, and that made me cry again. I started crying even more as they kept disappearing. I couldn't stop crying. The only one there was the old lady. I couldn't tell the time anymore. It felt like I've been in this place for decades. The old lady then turned around and started walking towards the fog. She disappeared as well. I lost my conscience. I don't know how long it's been, but I felt somebody waking me up. When I opened my eyes, I saw a Ukrainian soldier pointing his rifle at me. He had blue armbands and blue duct tape on his helmet. "Hey, get up," he told me. For some odd reason I was happy. I told them that I'm a Russian soldier and I got separated from my unit. I wasn't even afraid of him killing me, to be honest. In a few minutes more Ukrainian soldiers showed up. They picked me up and took me to the truck. I officially became prisoner of war. But I'd rather be a prisoner of war than continue in doing what we were doing. I can only hope that this war will end one day, so children can play outside without fear of dying. I am an F-22 pilot stationed in Alaska. Let's just say my story was somewhat famous at the beginning of 2023. I got stationed in Elmendorf Air Force Base in 2021, after my flight training was complete. This was my first duty station, so I was pretty excited about flying. That's the only thing I ever cared about. I wasn't married, and my girlfriend was in medical school in California. She would occasionally visit me or vice versa, but outside of work only thing I could think of was flying my F-22. F-22 is the most advanced aircraft in the entirety of the United States Air Force. It's fast, and is armed to the teeth. And the best part is that you are all by yourself. You don't have a weapons officer like F-18s do. On February 10th, it was my turn to conduct a NORAD air patrol mission. This was an on-call mission, so I just simply slept or played Xbox until alarm goes off. Then myself and my wingman would scramble and get directed to where we need to conduct an intercept. Usually it was nothing out of ordinary, a civilian aircraft whose radio is not working, or an occasional Russian Su-95 messing with us in the air defense identification zone, but nothing more than that. I reported for duty at 0600. I collapsed on the couch not expecting anything to happen. I usually tried staying up. You don't want to jump in your F-22 when you are groggy. I couldn't use my phone, and only thing was there to do is to watch a 2-day-old repeat of a hockey game between Kings and Canucks. Oh well, that's the job. Both myself and my wingman grabbed some coffee, and soon we sat down. The alarm went off. I grabbed my flight gear and ran towards the exit to an airfield. I got on the flight line and started with pre-checks. After completing the checklist I climbed inside my craft. My aircraft name was Toxic. Subsequently I adopted the same call sign. My wingman nickname was Speedy. As I was climbing into the cockpit, wave of excitement came over me. I didn't fly for 2 weeks due to some training and medical testing I had to do. But this time it's on. I was pumped, not because I get to intercept, but because I get to fly. I didn't really expect anything serious, but the idea of tearing up the sky was awesome to me. We took off from the airstrip, and I started to getting mission instructions from the air controller, who got them from our NORAD sector. There was an unidentified object descending from southwest from about 40,000 feet headed towards North Pole. It was moving fast, but not as fast as we could catch it. I thought it would be a Russian or Chinese reconnaissance plane or a stupid Chinese balloon again. We made our flight path straight north. Air controller was guiding us towards intercept. Usually once our radar begins to pick up the object we cut ties and handle it ourselves. But the object was still too far. We both picked up speed trying to intercept over the ocean instead of Alaskan landmass, but we had to change the course because the object picked up speed. We ended up flying towards North Pole, but still sort of in US airspace. Finally, we came within 10 nautical miles of the object. I started looking around, but still couldn't see anything. My radar wasn't getting any hits either. Speedy came on the net and informed me that he has some hits. He was higher than me. His radar could pick stuff up from a higher elevation. Hey dude, he is about 35,000 feet, moving at about 700. He said okay, that's not too bad I thought, but the altitude is pretty high. Once we get eyes on it, INWA's going to make a determination on whether or not to engage. I was fully expecting a Russian aircraft at this point. I climbed up to my wingman altitude to get a good radar hit, and I finally got it, but I still couldn't see it, and finally I was able to make out the target. What the fuck is that thing? Speedy called on the radio. I have no idea, man. I responded. What we saw shocked us both. It was a spherical looking thing, no windows, no wings, no visible propulsion system, just a smooth looking sphere. I didn't know what to do with that. I called air controller and described what I saw. I was hesitant to do so. I didn't want to get kicked out because my command would think that I'm seeing shit. But since Speedy is seeing the same thing, it was all good. Air controller said that NORAD instructions were to engage regardless of its intent. As I got closer to the object, my radar started to act out. It was the first time I have seen it do that. The thing obviously didn't like radar rays hitting it. Technically radar jamming is hostile intent, but I couldn't get myself to engage it. I asked for a clarification on rules of engagement from NORAD to win some time, hopefully by the time it would leave US airspace and we would RTB, but NORAD watch officer got on the radio and instructed me to engage immediately. I got directly behind an object and let off 2 Sidewinder missiles. Both of them missed despite me locking on target, which is not possible under normal circumstances. Shit, I thought, what the fuck is this thing? I still had 6 AMRAAM missiles, so I decided to empty my weapons bay completely. I shot all 6 and they all did the same thing, simply dove down when they left my weapons bay. I informed the NORAD watch floor that I have no effects on target. They instructed me to continue engagement. The object just kept flying like nothing bothered it. Then I decided to engage it with a Vulcan, which is my 20mm onboard machine gun for lack of a better word. I let off about 300 rounds, and object finally took a hit. It started dropping down. Oddly enough, it wasn't a fast fall, more like a feather dropped from 30th floor. I circled around it as it was falling. Speedy got lower to escort it down. After about 10 minutes it finally fell. It was almost like it weighed nothing. It didn't even make a splash on the snow. I reported a hit directly to NORAD. The watch officer congratulated me. I heard cheering on the background, but I for some reason felt awful about what I did. For some reason feeling of empathy rolled over me like a tsunami. NORAD instructed us to stay up until we get relieved by 2 F-16 from Air National Guard to keep an eye on this thing. After 30 minutes 2 F-16s arrived on the scene. We were relieved by my air controller. When Speedy and I landed, we were told not to ever speak about this by our security officer. Everybody seemed on the edge when we landed. Squadron commander personally listened to my debrief in the skiff. He told me, good job son, but let's not speak of it again, okay? There some high-ranking people were calling about making any official statements, so it went on. I still fly NORAF missions, but I will never forget the day I had to shoot down an innocent alien aircraft.
Have you ever heard stories about haunted barracks? Well, I got one for you. This one was sent to me by a United States Army sergeant, a combat engineer. I'm a United States Army sergeant, a combat engineer. My story is a rather strange one. I PCS'd to Fort Riley, Kansas from Fort Lewis back in 2008. I just got back from deployment, and PCS was not something I wanted to do. I loved my unit and wanted to stay, but my branch manager had other plans. I accepted the assignment and moved on. I reported at the beginning of November after a long drive from Fort Lewis. My new unit was 1st Engineer Battalion, diehards, so they called themselves. I reported after in processing the post. Battalion S1 assigned me to the 111th Engineer Company, Assassins. My first stop was talk to my new first sergeant. He was just another cookie-cutter first sergeant. You know, don't step on my grass type. I sat down in the chair after he told me to sit. He started to tell me about the platoon I'm about to join. He told me it's full of retards and fuck-ups, so hopefully I can lift them up a little. Or not. After he told me to sign for my barracks room key, he told me that I couldn't leave off post. I was single E5, and at a time the regulation said that E5s had to stay in the barracks. So the barracks it is. As he was telling me about the barracks situation, he told me that they had a soldier killing himself in his barracks room, and my room was right next to it. Then he said, I don't think there are any ghosts in there, you know, in case you're into that kind of stuff. His stuff is still there being inventoried before it gets sent back to his parents, so don't worry about it if you see any CID agents. While I was processing, I chose not to stay. While I wasn't processing, I chose not to stay in the barracks. I just got a hotel room in Junction City, Economy Inn, right off the highway. Well, I still had night left, and I didn't even step in the barracks room that night. I was told that there's a training tomorrow, so I just got my gear ready and ate some KFC while watching a movie. I didn't have much stuff, just my gear and some clothes, all fit in my small Mitsubishi. In the morning, around 05, I checked out of my hotel and went to the barracks for morning formation. It was Thursday, so in the Army it usually means sergeant's time training, just a day where you go and do some training. Being a combat engineer, it meant looking for some roadside bombs. That's what I did my first day at my new unit. Compared to my previous striker unit, things seemed chaotic and unorganized, and First Sergeant wasn't kidding about my platoon. We got done with training at around 1800. I went back to my room after swinging by PX to get some linen and pillows. Only thing I had was my laptop and some clothes, along with a little portable DVD player that I brought for me from Iraq. I had a huge collection of bootleg movies that I bought while I was deployed, and I spent my night watching some of them. I couldn't really sleep, this whole Fort Riley thing sucked, I thought to myself. Suddenly, I heard banging on the wall. It was kinda hard. I jumped off my bed and turned on the lights. What the fuck? I laid back down. Maybe some guys are having a wrestling match after a couple of drinks, but I didn't hear any voices. I laid back down and went to sleep. I had a family living in Colorado, about 7-hour drive from Fort Riley, and I decided to go there on the weekend just to get away from excitement of Kansas. I spent a weekend hanging out with my family and drove back to Fort Riley on Sunday. I got back late at night. Everyone in the barracks was already asleep. It was already about 2 in the morning. I was shuffling some of my stuff from my car to my room. I was going through where CQ was sitting. The poor dude was zoning in and out. I was on the second floor when I hit the stairwell. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't even look because I thought the CQ runner was doing his walkthrough, but when I turned to open the door, I saw that there was no one there. Again, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe just an echo. I was pretty tired after all. The next day there was usual Army Monday bullshit. PT following some motor pool maintenance. I spent all day fixing busted M113. It's like a little track that was popular in the 60s. I had dinner at DFAC and went back to my room to take a shower. I saw one of the guys living near me walk into his room. I asked him what the hell were people doing here on Thursday night. My room was located at the very end of the hallway. It was the second before last room. The noises were coming from the last room. The guy told me that no one lives there because that's where the soldier committed suicide. Damn, I thought. Then what was all that noise coming from? Well, maybe I was just tired and hear shit. I crashed on my bed, dead tired after a long day outside in the cold. I pulled out my DVD player and was watching some horrible movie. I couldn't sleep again, so I just kept watching more horrible movies. Things started to get quiet in the barracks as everyone started to go to sleep. It was 01 when I started to hear voices coming out of the room that was supposed to be empty. It sounded like someone was talking on the phone. It was quite inaudible at first, until I heard screaming, "You fucking bitch!" I again jumped out of the bed. I put on my slippers and walked out in the hallway. I went to the room and banged on the door. I started to think someone was fucking with me. No one responded. I banged on the door again, harder this time. Door behind me opened and a soldier poked his head out. A soldier was curious what I was doing with all that noise. I asked him if he heard anything. He said no, he just woke up. I went back to bed. Next day wasn't anything special. We basically hung out at the company area, and I was just meeting everybody. I started to get along with a couple of other NCOs. I started asking questions about the room right next to me. They all seemed hesitant to speak about it because there was still an active investigation going on, and people were getting interviewed by CID left and right. But if NCOs didn't talk, I knew who would. I remember the soldier that opened the door last night. I approached him and started asking questions about the guy who committed suicide. The guy didn't really know much because he just recently got here himself, but he said his roommate does. His roommate went on emergency leave and was gonna come back the next day. I repeated the same evening routine by going to DFAC and then heading to my barracks room. I bought some beers at Class 6. Yeah, I know what day of the week it is. Sorry that you disapprove. I had 2 or 3 beers that night. I haven't heard anything this time. I just ended up passing out. I had to get up to go to the bathroom. I looked at my watch. It said it was about 02:45. 2:45 a.m. for you civilian types. The bathroom right next to me was small, and as soon as you walk in, to your left there were 2 sinks and the shower. To the right there were 2 toilets and a urinal. I used the urinal and stepped over to the sink to wash my hands. Suddenly I started hearing sobbing. It was quiet, but I could still hear it. Both of the doors to the toilet were open, so I wasn't sure where it was coming from. When I turned the water off, sobbing turned into crying. Again, I have no clue where it was coming from, but I had a chill running down my spine. I freaked out and rushed out of the bathroom, back to my room and back to bed. The next day I was able to chase down the guy that knew what happened. Unlike everybody else, he was very talkative. He was a specialist a couple of months away from getting out of the army, so he cared less for investigative procedures. He told me that the guy committed suicide because his girl left him. Apparently, it was his high school sweetheart, and he loved her very much. After he came back from deployment, they started having issues, and eventually she broke up with him. Maybe there's more to that story, but that's all I heard. One day, he had a very angry conversation with her on the phone. After that, he went to the bathroom, where he spent about 2 hours. And then he went back to his room, put a gun to his head, and squeezed the trigger. It was late at night, and somehow nobody heard anything. He wasn't found until a couple days later. A huge failure on the part of his team leader, who was supposed to check on him daily. That's why NCOs were not talking about it much. Either way, I heard enough. We didn't really do much that day, just same old army nonsense. We finished the day by getting ready for Thursday training, signing out some trucks from Task C. It's like a training support warehouse that had all the equipment that unit can come and get. The other half of the day I was still fucking with the broken M113. It had a huge Class 3 oil leak. Class 3 means that oil was literally pouring out of the engine block, flooding the bottom of the track. I went back to company area after leaving motor pool. When I walked in my office, my platoon sergeant informed me that I had to cover down on CQ for another guy. Wasn't a huge problem with me. Nothing happened that night, thank God. Next morning after PT, I reported to CQ desk. CQ duty, or charge of quarters, is basically you're being up 24 hours, reporting anything that happens in the barracks to your commander and first sergeant after hours. Most of the time, nothing happened. I was hoping I didn't have to call the first sergeant. Most of the time, you'll get your ass chewing for not getting enough information about the incident, but that doesn't happen very often. My night on CQ was pretty quiet. At around 0300, I got up to do my CQ checks. I walked on the second floor, checked my cleaning closet and bathrooms and cleanliness. I started walking to the other end of the hallway where my room was when I saw a soldier dressed in ACU walking into allegedly empty room. I yelled down the hallway at him and told him to stop and get out of that room, since I had a very clear instructions from my first sergeant about not letting anybody in there. Soldier didn't even react like I existed. He just walked in the room and slammed the door. How the fuck did he do that? That thing was blocked and only CQ and the first sergeant had the key. I went down to CQ desk and pulled out a key for that fucking room. I told my runner I'll be right back, and I went to the second floor and went straight to it. I went in and turned the lights on. The room was in a state of a complete mess. There was some evidence bags, tape, along with belongings of a soldier laying all over the place. Who the fuck was that guy that walked in here? And what the fuck was he doing? And his ACU's at 03 in the morning. Did I just see a ghost? Quite frankly, I didn't catch what he looked like. I didn't even see his face or any other features. As I was looking at the room, wall locker door just slammed shut. Chills went down my spine and overwhelming feeling of fear took over. I didn't even turn the lights on. I just closed the door and went downstairs to smoke a cigarette. I wasn't gonna go tell anybody about this. I didn't want anybody to think that I was crazy. Those were different times. Nowadays you can openly talk about your mental health, but not back in 2008. I finished my CQ shift on Thursday morning. To my luck, I didn't have to do training. Yay. I just crashed on my bed and passed out. I woke up right before dinner and went down to DFAC to get some food. It was already kind of late, but I couldn't sleep, so I decided to take a drive down to Topeka. With no particular destination, just driving around and exploring. I got back to my room at around 10 o'clock. Barracks were still well and alive, with dudes drinking and playing Xbox with their doors open. I was a new guy, so I wasn't just gonna stumble into somebody's party. I still had some beers left, so I decided to finish off the six-pack. I couldn't sleep again, so I was hoping beers were gonna help me with that. I pulled out my DVD player and started watching a movie called Rise of a Foot Soldier. It was a really good movie, and I got fully consumed by it. It was 0100 when I heard a gunshot from inside the barracks. I jumped out of the bed and ran outside the hallway. I looked around and it was empty. No one else woke up. It was dead and empty. I walked down the hallway and I heard that somebody was still playing Xbox. I knocked on the door. Soldier answered. I asked him if he heard anything. He said no. Damn, there it is again. How come I'm only one that hears shit around here? Is this ghost hunting? And is it haunting just me? Well, that's some hazing bullshit. After this incident, it was quiet for a while. I didn't hear any more noises coming out of that room, and I thought finally it was over. I ended up going home to Colorado for 2 weeks of leave. I came back on January 2nd. First night after I got back, it was quiet. What I saw was still giving me creeps, but I started to forget it. But on the second night, it came back again. I went to sleep early that day just to catch up on sleep I lost while I was driving from leave. I took some NyQuil and passed out. Suddenly, a super loud police knock woke me up. I freaked out thinking I missed PT, and it was my squad leader knocking on the door trying to wake me up. I did take some NyQuil, and it usually knocks me out like that. I got up expecting to see my squad leader at the doorway, but when I opened the door there was nobody. In fact, it was quiet. I looked at my wristwatch and I saw that it was 0300. God damn it, I thought. Maybe it was just a dream. I collapsed back on my bed and heard a knock again. At this point, I didn't know what to think. I started to think that I was going crazy. For all I know, maybe I was. I didn't open the door this time, but knocking just kept going. I started hearing voices. They were kind of fade, but it sounded something like, "Help me, please, I just need to talk to somebody." What the hell, I thought. This is too much. I rushed to the door and swung it open. I don't know what I was thinking. I left the wall locker doors open behind me, and as I opened the door, they slammed shut, loud as hell. I ran out of the room and ran to my car. Fuck that. I ain't going back in there. I'm talking to the first sergeant first thing in the morning. And if he sends me to mental health, I'm going fucking AWOL. I slept in the car for the rest of the night with just my PTs on. At around 0545, I drove over to the company, hoping to run into the first sergeant. I pulled up and saw his car parked in a spot. Awesome. He was there in the meeting with the company commander and all the platoon leaders. So I waited right outside his office until he was done. Finally, he walked out and saw me. He asked if I wanted to talk to him. I told him yes. When we walked in his office, he closed the door and asked me if it was about my barracks room, and I said yes, it was. He lazily sat down with an attitude and put his feet up on the table. He said, "Look, I'm sick and tired of you E5s bitching about your barracks. Lucky for you, I'm getting a new batch of soldiers. And guess what? There's no barracks rooms for you guys. So, in 2 weeks, you're to leave the barracks and go find off-post apartments. I know you don't have basic allowance for housing yet, but or also known as BH, it's like a housing allowance that Army pays you if you live off-post. But he told me it kicks in on February 1st, but we can take an advance to cover any moving expenses. I was in a bit of a shock, but super happy on the inside. I was about to come over the table and give that bastard a kiss on the forehead. I guess he's not that much of an asshole after all. After PT, I went off to my room and emptied out. I had some money from my deployment, which I used to pay for a first available apartment in Manhattan, Kansas. Small Kansas college town, home of Kansas State University, about 20 minutes from Fort Riley. I was glad to get the fuck out of those barracks. They still give me creeps, and I feel awful for old soldiers that have to live there. To my surprise, I didn't hear anything about the room anymore. Once his stuff was all gone, all the paranormal activity seemed to stop. Maybe he attached himself to objects that were still in his room. Either way, I'm glad it's over. Have you ever heard of Joint Special Operations Command? I hope you didn't, because I'm a member of a special mission unit that is supposed to be super secret. It's so secret that they make movies and show about us. Anyways, I am part of Combat Application Group, also known as Delta Force, or Operational Detachment Delta, or, well, you know where I'm going with this. My story began in 1998 when I joined the Army. I kept getting in trouble as a teenager, so my parents were happy that I finally chose something that will give me a structured environment and discipline. I joined as 11 Bravo, infantryman. When I went to basic training and got out of the bus, I was attacked by a horde of drill sergeants. At that point, I realized that I might have made a mistake. Have you ever watched The Jarhead? Great movie, I recommend it. There's a scene in there where drill instructor yells at the Marine recruit, asking him, "What the fuck are you even doing here?" And he responds with, "I got lost on my way to college, sir." Well, that was me. I kept trying to think of ways to get the fuck out, but deep enough inside into basic training and AIT, I decided to give it a chance. I was never really good with listening to others. There was a teen rebel spirit well alive inside of me that needed to get beaten out. And basic training did just that. I graduated basic training and went down to Fort Stewart, Georgia. 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne, just in time to deploy to Kosovo. Kosovo was a peacekeeping mission with occasional construction projects. Nothing really memorable about this deployment. I came back to Fort Stewart at the end of 1999, and the division was gearing up to go back. I spent time fucking off with my unit until a buddy of mine dragged me to Special Forces recruiting brief. The recruiter showed us the awesome video and told us how laid back things were in Special Forces compared to regular Army. Well, let's just say I was sold. Now all I had to do is to get to rank of corporal or specialist, and I can get orders to Fort Bragg to attend Special Forces selection. I was a PFC at a time with 15 months in service, and I quickly got squared away and began doing a lot of BT. My next APFT, or Army Physical Fitness Test, I scored 300, which is maximum score. I was immediately put on a waiver for promotion to specialist. Little did my unit know, the day I got pinned, I went down to see a Special Forces recruiter. They had me take a PT test again, and a week later I had my orders on hand to go to Fort Bragg. My leadership was skeptical that I can make it through, knowing my rambunctious nature, but I was good to go. Special Forces fit my needs of fucking off and shooting people in the face. At least that was my idea of it. I kept having an image of me walking to my company office with a green beret while having my hands in my pockets, telling everybody trying to correct me to fuck off. But there was a price to pay for being able to do that. I flew to Fayetteville, North Carolina in summer 2000. Paid for my hotel on post. It was called Airborne Inn. It was rather nice for an on-post hotel. I was able to chug a couple of beers the night prior, beginning of as FAS. And Finally, the next morning, I headed down to the parking lot where SFAS cadre were picking us up. Instant feeling of regret came again when I showed up in my stripped-down BDUs with the white engineer tape. I realized I'm back to the crazy training environment. We were loaded on the truck and driven to the place called Camp McCall. That's where selection takes place. Surprisingly enough, I was quickly in a groove. It was demanding physically, but it was very laid back overall. There was no screaming and pointless mass punishment events that are so rampant in basic training. I was rocking all the training events. Luckily, all of them were physical, with some mental mindfuck games, but that was only during land navigation course that's called STAR course. To my surprise, I got selected. The Special Forces qualification course is a long journey. After I finished the SEER school, also known as Survive, Evade, Resist, Escape, in a nutshell, it's just a course that teaches you how to survive as a POW. I walked out and I found out that the United States was attacked on the September 11th after graduating on the September 20th. Frankly, all I wanted to do at that point is to go fuck some shit up overseas, but I still had to go through Robin Sage. That's like a capstone course that teaches you how to operate as an ODA, or 12-man team that recruits, trains, and employs natives to overthrow their governments. Ha ha ha. No, really, that's what we do. After graduating and donning my green beret, I already forgot about going to my unit and telling everyone to fuck off. I got assigned to Fort Campbell, 5th Special Forces Group, 2nd Battalion. 5th Special Forces Group was assigned to Central Command, right where I wanted to go. They were in charge of task force running things in Afghanistan. I deployed with my team at the end of 2002. When I deployed, I ran into some Delta Force dudes. They were even cooler than us. They had some awesome gear and didn't even have to wear uniforms. Damn, I thought, I should check this place out. During my deployment, we mostly trained Afghan forces. They were kinda useless for the most part, but they were getting better as we went. The deployment was only 7 months, so I came back in 2003 just as Operation Iraqi Freedom was kicking off. My company was already tagged to go to Iraq to train Iraqi counterterrorism unit. I decided to contact Delta Force recruiter. Their process was similar to Special Forces, but a lot more cryptic. I emailed my application packet and got a response. I was told that my application is being reviewed and they will contact me. And they did. About 2 weeks ago. Right before my ODA was about to get on a plane to go to Iraq, with set of my orders to report to Virginia for selection. My team captain was a bit pissed, but there was no shortage of volunteers to deploy to Iraq. They let me go and I was on the plane flying to attend Delta selection. The Delta selection sucked even more than SFAS. The rugged terrain and longer rock marches really beat me up. Luckily, rock marching and PT in general was never my problem. I went through Delta selection and got picked up again. I attended a course called OTC. It's an operator training course. 6 months of shooting and CQB or close quarter battle. It was like the coolest thing I've ever done. You shoot so much it becomes like a second nature to you. It's almost like a weapon is an extension of you at that point. The atmosphere was different from Special Forces. I grew up in California, so surfer-like culture of Sea Squadron was like a paradise to me. I was surrounded by badass dudes, and I can finally call myself that as well. Yes, I was a badass. No one can stop me now. Well, to my disappointment, I quickly got humbled. Being a new and the youngest guy on a team, I was being treated like such until I proved myself. My team leader, let's just call him Wild Bill, said, "You have a lot to learn," when he first met me. That's about the only thing he said in the next 2 months. We were headed back to Afghanistan. The rumor had it we were to continue search for Osama bin Laden. Since Delta already caught Saddam, he was back at the top of the list. We deployed to Afghanistan in 2005. Finally, I got to go to my first mission. It was a high-value target capture or kill. We flew in at night and raided a couple of empty houses, not finding anything. We turned around and went back. That went on for a couple of weeks. Finally, we had an intel hit on an American hostage. But the location was not in Afghanistan. She was held hostage in Iran by an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps operatives. Wild Bill was visibly concerned about hitting Iranian territory, but the village she was held in was close enough to Afghan border where air support can drop some heat if we needed it. We were briefed about how sensitive this mission was. This was a quick in and out. Intel picked up about 4 guards and some civilians that were hanging out. The whole thing was a bit bizarre. All we knew that hostage was an Israeli-American physicist. What the fuck was she doing there? She wasn't teaching advanced physics to Iranian kids, did she? But we told everything. We told the rest of her background was highly classified, and all we needed to know is that what she looks like. Well, fair enough. We began planning and rehearsals for upcoming mission. Birds were gonna fly below radar and insert our team right on the roof of the target house while the second team lands on the ground. Should be easy peasy. We thought 4 guards wasn't a whole lot to take out if we worked fast enough. We had to be in and out quick because there was a scheduled 500-pound bomb drop on the target house right after our exfil. It only gave us a couple hours for mission to be complete. That was a huge concern for Wild Bill. He wanted more time, but Commander said that it was all he was going to get, given the fact that mission is in Iran and not in Afghanistan. We finally got on the Chinook that was going to take us to the target house. It was about 2200 with a 2-hour flight. We were going to get picked up by the other sortie of Chinooks just because of how far it was. There was a quick reaction force consisted of Ranger platoon that was going to hang out near the border on a makeshift helipad in case we ran into some issues. We flew low to where you could almost smell vegetation from the mountains below. Finally, hit the objective. Chinook hovered over the target house and we quickly fast drove down. We could see the second burn landing out in the distance with dudes running out of the back of the ramp. All I was doing at that point is following the guy in front of me. The building itself was a small 2-story structure with a double roof, which had a little balcony. We jumped down on the lower roof and started scanning for threats. The ground guys were busting through the gate when 2 guards ran outside without knowing we were right behind them. We took both of them out faster than they could yell out. I put good half of a mag into one. The gate was busted and second team started pouring into the compound. We turned on our IR markers so they don't mistakenly shoot us. They already knew we were there and they just went straight for the door, which was left open by the guards. We heard yelling in Farsi and we saw our remaining 2 guards walk out with their hands up. Damn, that was fast. Now all we gotta do is take the hostage and get the fuck out. The guard kept pointing inside and saying, "Danger, danger," in English. I didn't really understand what was going on, but Wild Bill was having none of it. Guys threw both guards down, tied them up, and moved into the house. As the ground team entered the house, things got quiet. All I kept hearing on the radio net is guys calling out, "Clear, clear." When suddenly, I heard, "What the fuck is that?" And shooting started. It sounded like hundreds of pieces of bacon started popping out of nowhere. I got startled and looked and took a knee. I didn't know what was going on, but something went horribly wrong. The assistant team leader motioned to us to come inside the house and see what was going on. 3 guys stayed on the outside pulling security in case reinforcements show up. I went inside the house. I was expecting to get in a gunfight. My blood was pumping. The radio chatter fell silent right after the shooting, so I thought the whole team was just died in place. We went inside looking for them, but there was nobody there. There was not even a sign of them. There was no breaths on the floor, no bodies. It was like they never went inside. We were trying to move tactically in a stack, clearing one room after another. There was a basement in that house, but the point man wasn't able to find it. Now finally, there was only one door left. The house was kind of cold and dark inside. There was very little light, just a small light bulb in the hallway. Suddenly we started hearing voices, but it was like they were coming from everywhere, like right next to us. We all stopped in shock. What the fuck? It felt like we were tripping on mushrooms. I started seeing waves of light that I wouldn't be able to see with the naked eye. Things started to slow down, including voices of my teammates. I dropped my M4 making a loud noise. Luckily it was unsafe so it didn't fire. Voices were getting closer and closer and I started to recognize my teammates' voices. I heard Wild Bill talking, and as he was talking I started to see him. He was in the large room attending to some woman laying on the floor. He yelled at me, "Get the fuck up and help." I quickly jumped on my feet and walked towards him. I couldn't believe it was real. I touched him just to make sure it was real. He lashed out, "Get your fucking hands off me, you weirdo. Help me get her up." We got her up and walked out. The whole time helping him move the woman, all I thought that I had gone insane, but so was the rest of my teammates. They were all in the same state of mind. My buddy's eyes were wide open as he was looking at the members of the missing team. I asked Bill, "You guys didn't see that?" He replied, "See what? All I saw was 2 more guards that we had to smoke. Intel fucked it up again. We almost got killed, but yeah, that was crazy." As we walked out, 2 Chinooks flew in to pick us up. It felt surreal. We got everyone on a bird and left 2 captured guards tied up in the front yard of the house. I don't know what it was, but maybe there was some kind of disturbance of space and time in that place, but I'm glad it turned out okay, and we didn't get stuck in some void for the rest of our lives.
Many of you Americans heard about Russian sleep experiment, and some of you might thought that it might have been just a campfire scary story that never happened. Well, I cannot confirm or deny whether such experiment took place, but I can confirm that there was one that did happen, and it was very recent and very terrifying, and it is still sort of going on. I say sort of because we don't know what happened to the subject. It all began in 2014 after glorious liberation of Crimea. President was very concerned about NATO invading the motherland, and he wanted solutions. Little bit about myself. I am an operative of a CSNFSB, also known as Alpha. It's FSB Special Forces. I usually spend my time hunting down terrorists that threaten Russia. Enough about myself. ND Directorate of FSB offered a solution, a super soldier. There was a crazy scientist in the 3rd Directorate that said that he can make him an army of super soldiers that will defeat any threat. We all laughed at him at the time, calling him a universal soldier, but he insisted and was able to score a huge grant. I wish I knew what was coming so I could shoot him right in his forehead. But at the time of our country being threatened by NATO, our political leadership were willing to spend money on anything, especially if it meant winning wars. I was detailed as a security manager for this project. While I was in Moscow, I kept going to coordination meetings. They were top secret, only few people knew. Only the director, chief of FSB, and the president knew about it. I was able to get my friend Sergei out of Syria and making him my deputy. He was briefed on everything and agreed to participate. The first thing first, we needed subjects. Of course, no one would want to volunteer for something like that. And plus, we couldn't ask for volunteers because the operation was inherently clandestine. I sat down with my buddy Sergei, and we figured out a plan how to get ourselves some subjects off the books. We were going to go to penal colony that held terrorists, and what we're just going to buy one. Meaning being warden of fake prisoner's death and then picking him up. We found a prison just outside of Moscow. It was about 3-hour drive. We grabbed our minivan and started driving. We researched warden's file before going over there. One corrupt bastard he was. He was even nearly fired one time for suspicion of releasing prisoners for a hefty sum of money. Most of them were mafia guys, but now the prison was converted into a colony that had terrorist suspects in it. In Russia, terrorists is a less than human being, so nobody would cry out about disappearance of one, especially if paperwork is straight. I gave Warden a call prior to our arrival. We had a suitcase full of money for all of the expenses. We were going to meet at the restaurant where we would discuss the price and some details. After a 3-hour drive, we finally arrived at the restaurant. The greedy bastard was already there. There was a bottle of expensive vodka sitting on the table. He really wanted the money. He was a man, and he's late 50s, bold and overweight, what early signs of cirrhosis. We started off talking about cars as he was a huge car enthusiast. He pointed his Bentley sitting outside, and he said he wanted another one. The warden got really drunk and accepted our proposal for $70, $0,000, $30, $0,000 less than we expected. Me and Sergey split the difference. He will make a nice present for wife. He told us about a one terrorist, but a suspect he wants to get rid of. He said that he's very influential on other prisoners, and he converted many prisoners into Islam. The warden didn't like that very much, as he told us he was devoted Orthodox Christian. He was about as Orthodox Christian as I was an extraterrestrial. We stayed in the hotel that night. It would take a couple of days for him to get things ready and pay off the right people to keep quiet, mainly in the coroner. The warden was supposed to call us. When it was all set, all we had to do is just come and pick him up. The coroner was going to roll him out after the prisoner got sedated, making it look like he died to the guards in case there's any questions later from his family or whatever. As far as they will know, he is already dead. Like I said, terrorists are not considered to be people in Russia. The next day we got a phone call. It was warden. He said that we need to meet the coroner at the back gate of the prison, where he would turn over prisoner to us. Everything went smooth. We simply drove up and picked the guy up. He was completely knocked out by whatever coroner gave him. He told us he should last about 2 to 3 hours. I called my boss to inform him that we got the package and that we are ready for the next phase. My boss emailed me a special pass that would get me through a gate of a secret FSB airfield. It was about a 2-hour drive from where we were. We were to drive over there, load the subject, and escort them to a secret facility. The drive was uneventful, was knocked out the whole time. We drove up to the gate of the airfield. There was an FSB officer guarding it. I showed him the pass, and he let us through. There was an IL waiting for us on the tarmac. We were the only passengers. We rolled the guy inside the plane and tied him up to a bench. My boss didn't give me any more instructions, so we were assuming somebody was going to meet us on the other end. I gave him a call before we loaded, telling him that we were about to go. He just acknowledged it and hung up the phone. We didn't really know where we were going, but judging my plane, it was far, like really far. I walked over to a cockpit and asked the pilot if he knew where we were headed. He said we were going to city of Odakhny in Yakutia. If you don't know, it's ultra remote area even for Russia, covered with northern forests and tundras. There was only one big city in Yakutia, and by big I mean maybe 300,000 people. Rest were small mining towns and temporary nomadic settlements. Yakutia is 3 times smaller than United States, but with 100 times less population, so you can imagine the vastness of this region. It was mostly unpopulated, and many places in Yakutia never seen a human being. Like I said before, Yakutia is mostly taiga or tundra. There is a beautiful river called Lena that runs through it. There is some mountains and volcanoes as well. We landed in Yakutsk International Airport. There was a van waiting for us right on the tarmac. To my surprise, the package didn't wake up the whole time. When we landed, he finally did. He started asking questions. "Where am I?" he asked. "Shut your mouth. You aren't allowed to talk," Sergei told him and smacked him in his head. The guy was terrified. He had no clue what is happening to him. He was just staring at the ramp of Ol, slowly coming down. "Where are you taking me?" he asked again. He looked like he was about to break down crying. Sergei hit him on the back of his head, knocking him out. "Damn it, Serega. Why did you do that? Now you'll have to carry him." I told him, okay, I will carry this piece of shit." Sergei picked him up on his shoulder and walked him to the van waiting for us outside. The driver had a blacked out glass between us and him, so we just offloaded the package and knocked on it, letting him know to get going. It was February in Yucatán, and it was absolutely freezing cold. It was so cold I started having icicles on my eyebrows after being outside for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Luckily, it was nice and warm inside the van. Know how long the ride was going to be? The ride ended up being 8 hours. During 8 hours, the prisoner woke up. To be quite honest, I didn't see a hardcore terrorist. The warden said he was. I saw a terrified kid in his mid-to-20s. I asked him what his name was. He said his name was Muhammad, and that he's a native of Dagestan. He was snatched at night by Russian National Guard and thrown in jail. As he was talking, Sergei elbowed me in the stomach and reminded Muhammad not to speak. He had a point. We didn't know what was going to happen to this kid. Last thing you want to do is create some kind of an emotional attachment. We sat there quiet the whole time, wholly no cell phone signal, and we weren't given a satellite phone. It started to feel lonely and isolated. Finally, we arrived. It was about midday. Driver pulled up to some gate at the very end of a gravel road. He then turned around, facing the back door towards the gate so he doesn't see us. We picked up Muhammad and went up to the gate. As soon as we and our stuff was offloaded from the van, the driver sped away. The gate opened up. The scientist I was talking about earlier, Dr. Frolov, was standing there. He told us to hurry up and get them inside the house. It was miserably cold, with a snowstorm rolling in within next hour or so. We went inside the building. The building itself looked like it was built in the 30s. It was made out of solid red brick, which was rather strange for the area. Most of the houses here were wooden. The building was completely ran out on the outside, but you could see where windows blocked by center blocks covered with cement. It looked like it was done pretty recently. There was a generator running on the outside, a huge thing in industrial caterpillar type. Right next to it was a fuel tank. It was huge as well. We went inside the building, and it looked a little better inside. You could tell whatever grant money the scientist got, he didn't steal. It was fairly modern with outlets and cameras all over the place. Dr. Frolov told us to take Mohammed to what he called an isolator. We took him in there and uncuffed him. There was a bed there, and that's about it. Mohammed looked at me with sheer terror in his eyes. I started to feel bad for him, but I had to remind myself that he was terrorist. Mohammed started crying, asking us what we're going to do to him. Hell, even if I knew, I wouldn't tell him, but I really did not know. We locked the door and walked over to Dr. Frolov's office. He had a bunch of screens from different angles watching Mohammed. "Okay, you two sit down," he said. "What you need to know about what we're about to do here is what I'm doing is in the interest of national security, protecting our motherland from Western invaders. I believe in what I'm doing. Do you?" He looked at both of us, expecting an answer. We both do, I said. "Otherwise we wouldn't be here." "Good," he said. "Then I can explain you what we're about to do here. The terrorist piece of trash that you see in the screens will receive a daily injection of a classified stimulant. It will keep him up for days, maybe weeks, or maybe even longer. He will go through multiple stages of sleep deprivation. In about 2 to 3 weeks, I expect that his physical body dies. And then she will be reborn, but he will be different. I can program him to do things that no human can possibly do. Sure, I do that. I will CAT scan his brain. I need a good baseline for my research. Just so you remember, there's only 6 people know about this: the President, Chief of FSB, Chief of 3rd Directorate, and you two. Do you understand? I thought them. This guy makes me extremely uncomfortable, and everything he's about to do sounds pretty brutal. I told Dr. Frolov that I understand and will carry out whatever he needed. I also told him he won't have any issues with us. We're both professional FSB officers with years of combat experience. He nodded. "Okay, we will start tomorrow morning. Let subject sleep tonight. It will be his last night." Somebody had to guard Mohammed, so me and Sergei decided to split 12-hour shifts. There was something off about this whole situation. He basically was going to kill the guy. There's no way a brain can survive that kind of abuse. And besides, this is some stuff Nazis used to do to Jewish people. And we do not like Nazis. My grandfather fought them and died while he was doing that. We will see where it goes. Mohammed peacefully slept on his bed. When it's 6:00 in the morning, Dr. Frolov woke me up and told him I need to help him with injecting the subject. He walked in a room. Mohammed was still sleeping. He told me to hold him down while he was injecting him with a stimulant. Mohammed tried to resist, but he was too scrawny and weak to do anything about it. He got injected. He kept asking what we injected him with. I just told him not to worry about it and that it was medicine. I went to sleep after I got relieved by Sergei. She was not in a good mood, and I was afraid he's going to start using physical violence against Mohammed. I woke up and went to get some food in the kitchen. The kitchen was fully stocked with pretty much everything we need. There was also a freezing room full of meats and other stuff. I went to relieve Sergei and asked him how subject was doing. Sergei smiled at me and told me that unfortunately he was still alive. I smacked at him and sat down on the chair. I could see Muhammad in the CCTV footage. He was still fine, he was just praying. For next 12 hours I get to watch him and give him another dose in the morning. What does it always have to be me? Prayed few more times, and then he just sat it on the bed. I could tell through the camera that he was sobbing and crying and then praying again. I could only imagine what was going through his head. But I couldn't help him, otherwise I would end up in the room with him. She finally laid down, but he kept getting up. This stimulant started to work. He kept pacing back and forth, back and forth. He said down again. He got down on his knees and prayed some more. That went on for 12 hours of my shift. I finally got relieved by Sergey in the morning. To my surprise, I didn't have to administer the dose. Sergey was going to do that. I was just there for backup. Both Dr. Frolov and Sergey walked in a room. In Muhammad down, and then Jeff at him again. As they were walking away, Muhammad was just laying there on the floor crying. It was no terrorist. Just another kid that was just rolled up for no reason, just to show the government Russian National Guard is fighting terrorism. I was going to pay visit to Warden after this thing was over. There were plenty of hardcore terrorists in that prison. Why did have to give us this kid? I want to sleep and repeat it routine again. Food back to the screens. This was a second day of Muhammad not sleeping. I could tell he was trying to, but he couldn't. Then he just couldn't tell what was going on. But at this point, he should have been already suspecting that the reason he's not sleeping is because of the daily injections. She kept doing the same thing, basing the room, and then getting on his knees to pray. What a strong man he is, I thought. I couldn't even imagine what I would do if I was in his shoes. But he was so calm and hopeful, and he kept asking God for forgiveness for whatever he did. It's almost like he knew that this was the end of him. Nothing special happened that night. I got relief by Sergey and I'm to bed. I didn't see Dr. Frolov and Sergey injecting him this time. Be quiet, Frank, I couldn't look at it. All I heard is Seam screaming again, begging for them to stop. During my next shift, I noticed was sitting there and talking to somebody. There was nobody in a room, just him. I figured he was having hallucinations. I had those myself a few times, but I never really went beyond those. Muhammad kept laying down trying to sleep, but he couldn't. He would get up again and get on his knees and pray. Then he finally lay down on the bed, and he finally laid on the bed and started moving his hands like he was touching something. Morning, the doctor had me escort him into the room to administer another injection. Muhammad didn't resist it. To my surprise, he just laid there. He didn't have any more energy. He gave up. I went back to sleep thinking about morality of what we're doing here. I even started crying, feeling bad for the kid. I woke up and I spent another 12 hours watching him. At this point, he was just standing there looking at the wall. You could tell he was going insane. Dr. Frollo finally walked in usually. He walked in and told me did not let him pray. Why not? I said, because I said so. And you don't ask me and you goddamn questions. You do as you're told. I was boiling inside from condescending attitude of this guy. I just wanted to pull out my gun and shoot him right in the face and let the kid go. but I swallowed it. But I let him pray anyways. Knowing that he's going to die, he needed to connect to God. But at this point, he wasn't praying anymore anyways. He just sat on the bed, rocking from side to side, crying, having conversation with somebody who is not there. It was brutal to watch. I couldn't believe I agreed to this. Next several nights, he just laid there without moving. He would get up and pace. I have another conversation, and then he would lay back down. I'm not entirely sure how long he was going to be awake, for Dr. Frollo wasn't talking much about it, so it was mystery from both me and Sergei. It's been over a week now, maybe about 11 days. The next night, I was manning my post while Sergei walked in on me. He was drunk, really drunk. He sat down on the chair right next to me and was trying to start a conversation. Why don't I just walk in there and shoot him right in his head? I told him that wasn't the job. I don't care what job is. Why are we sitting here and watching this guy? It's people like him that used to kill my comrades in church. Now why should I let him live? I told him that he should go back to his room and go to sleep. He told me, listen, Commander, I don't want to be here anymore. I just want to go back home. So let's just go end it right now. Sergei then started crying. He kept saying, I need to go home. I just want to home. To be quite honest, it's been 2 weeks since we both saw sunlight. I didn't tell anything to Dr. Frolov, but literally next day he had us switch shifts. I was now up with him during a day, which I didn't really like, because I didn't like him at all. At this point, Mohammed wasn't even responsive. He wasn't eating his food. You could tell that his body began to shut down. He was just laying there on the bed and talking. I couldn't really understand what he was saying. He was speaking a language I never heard before. I thought it was a local Dagestani language called Avar, but it was not that. Well, after all, it's been 2 weeks of him not sleeping, so he is probably matching words and letters. So maybe that what was happening. In about 3 days, he stopped moving. Dr. Frolov was pacing back and forth. Looking at him, I think he is dead. Doctor, he is not dead. He is undergoing transformation now. We administered another dose. His eyes were open, but doctor checked his vitals, and he was still alive. He detected a faint heartbeat that went on for a few more days. I lost count, to be perfectly honest. He was laying there motionless. The stimulant was not doing anything anymore. He visibly lost at least 20 kilograms at that point, and he looked like a skeleton. But somehow he was still alive. Next day, me and doctor went in to do another dose. I wasn't pinning him down anymore. A sit was pointless. Suddenly, Mohammed grabbed doctor's hand. Dr. Frolov screamed from pain. Mohammed was just laying there looking at him with his eyes wide open, and then he looked at me with the creepiest smile I ever saw. I had chills run down my spine. The Mohammed let go and laid his head back on the pillow. His eyes were wide open. Dr. Frolov jumped back. He said, okay, good. It was earlier than I thought. He walked out without giving a dose. He walked out of the room and showed me his wrist. It was completely blue and bruised up, like a RoboCop squeezed his wrist for about an hour. Doctor was in pain. but I kind of felt good on the inside. Finally, he got what he deserved. He sat on the chair and swallowed some painkillers. He told me he was going to lay down. I told him okay, just as long you are not in my sight. I sat back down and kept watching him. He was laying on the bed completely motionless. He was gone in a vegetable state. I was thinking his brain is dead. It's just a body now. That went on for another 2 weeks. Muhammad was soiling himself as he was laying there, and his bodily function also stopping. It looked absolutely horrific. I just stopped paying attention to the cameras, and I was just sitting there reading some books that I bought while visiting Warden. One day, I looked up, and I saw Muhammad standing in the center of the room and looking straight at me. What the hell? I got up and called Dr. Frolov. He walked in, and his eyes opened wide. It's here. It's finally here. He pressed a microphone button to talk to him. "What's your name?" he asked him. He didn't respond, he just turned his head to the side like he was trying to get a better look. Muhammad started smiling, but in the most evil way possible. "Are you Muhammad?" he asked. Muhammad just kept staring. "I am your master now," Frolov said. "Do you understand that?" He just stood there still. "You will do what I tell you to do. Do you understand?" Again, he just kept smiling in the camera. I noticed that he was not even standing. His feet were off the floor. He was levitating. "Oh, Jesus, what is this?" I said out loud. Dr. Frolov was not moving, just kept staring at him. Finally, he said, "He is not listening. He's supposed to listen." Doctor started pacing. Muhammad was still just standing there. Then he started talking. "Hello, doctor," he said. His voice was different. It was deep and raspy. Frolov started walking backwards until he hit the wall. "I am here, like you wanted," Muhammad said. "Who are you?" Frolov replied. "I don't know, doctor. Maybe you should. Maybe you can tell me who I am." He continued, "Maybe the better question here is who you are. Are you a Dr. Frolov, or just an average pedophile?" Frolov started to get nervous. "What?" I said. "What is he talking about?" "He is playing with us," Frolov said. "He is trying to get inside our heads. Doctor, you need to tell me what is going on here." "I don't know. I don't know." Frolov started kicking and screaming. Sergei woke up and ran into the room to see what was happening. Dr. Frolov fell on his butt and started screaming and kicking. Muhammad just stood there. "Hello, Sergei," he said. Sergei looked up at me in anger. "Why did you tell him my name?" I didn't. Sergei pulled out a gun and pointed at me. "I always knew you were a terrorist lover," he said. "Put the gun down now, Lieutenant," I told him. He looked at Frolov and slowly put the gun away. "Sergei, do you remember how your daddy died?" "Ha ha ha ha," Muhammad said. Sergei's eyes filled with rage. "That's it. I'm ending him." He started walking. I yelled at him, yelling him to stop or I am going to shoot him myself for disobeying an order of a superior officer. That made him stop. He was in pain. "Your poor daddy, ha ha ha. And you were so little and helpless, ha ha ha." I told Sergei to leave. He kept looking at the screen and his face was turning red. "Sergey, leave and wait outside," I told him. He complied and left. Frolov was paralyzed by fear. Something inside of me was telling me to talk to him. I pressed a microphone button. "Mohammed, is it you?" I asked him. He just stood there smiling. Dr. Frolov was just laying there crying and mumbling something. I told Dr. Frolov that he needs to do something. He needs to put himself together. After all, he was the one that created this situation. But he was paralyzed. He was just frantically moving and mumbling something. Dr. Frolov, get up and do something." Mohammed started talking again. He said, "I'm afraid, Captain, he's not going to be able to do anything, because he knows that I know who he truly is. Would you like me to tell you who he truly is?" As you said, that Dr. Frolov started screaming. I didn't want to do that. He screamed out. Mohammed started singing. It sounded super creepy. It was an old song from a Soviet cartoon, my favorite cartoon from my childhood. I looked at Mohammed, and he looked at me again. "Just remember, Captain, you have summoned me here, and now you're scared. You people are really pathetic. You have no courage, no morals, no honor." Sergey walked back into the building and stepped into the conversation. Mohammed said, "Oh, hello, Sergey. How was your break? I hope I didn't cause any painful memories to come back from your daddy's death." Said you never talked about his dad's death. All I know that he was an officer in Russian army, and he died while fighting in Chechnya in mid-90s. Sergey wasn't listening this time. He walked straight into the Mohammed's room, erased his gun, and shot him right in the head. It was so fast I didn't even have time to say anything. But Mohammed didn't fall down. He just looked at Sergey as blood was dripping down on his eyes. Then he moved so fast, grabbing Sergey by his throat and pinning him against the wall. Sergey was a big guy. I have no idea how Mohammed had so much strength. It was almost unhuman. But after everything I heard him say, and do I realize that he was not human anymore, he was something else. As he had a pinned against the wall, started talking to Sergey, but in a different voice. It sounded like the voice of an older man. Sergey, I will be back, okay? Don't worry about me." Then his voice changed again. "That's what your daddy told you, right? Oh, that was a lie. He died like a useless sack that he was, killing innocent people." I looked at Frolov again. He was completely gone. He was just staring out in a distance, completely spaced out. I realized that he created something he couldn't control. I pulled my gun out and put it to his forehead. "You need to tell me what the hell that thing is." "Demon, it's a demon. I summoned the demon. I thought I could control him. There's an ancient way to do that, but it didn't work. You need to ask him his name. He has to tell you his name." I turned towards the microphone. "What is your name, demon? Tell me your name." Mohammed started laughing. "You people watch too many movies. I don't to tell you anything." He still had Sergey bend against the wall with just his right hand. Sergey was paralyzed by fear. "Demon, what do you want?" I asked. "What's with the insults? Stop calling me names. Demon, devil, evil. Let's look at the facts here. What evil have I ever done?" You have grabbed an innocent person who was falsely accused of terrorism, kept him up for a month, which killed the poor guy's body. Can you summon me? And now you ask me what do I want? You're afraid of me. The question here is what do you want? Doctor curled up on the floor and started crying. I looked at him. You knew, didn't you? This wasn't about super soldiers. This is some sick prophecy that you're trying to make come true, isn't it? You piece of shit. Frolov started crying even harder. I had to do it. God spoke to me and told me to do it. I didn't want any of this. Muhammad started laughing again. God told you to do it. Are you sure it was God, doctor? Do you think God would talk to you after what you've done? But you know who would? Me, because you cannot walk earth after what you've done. The souls of those that you harmed asked me to tell you to summon me so you can pay the price for all I've started, hysterically crying and screaming and begging for mercy. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I thought, God forgive me. I was utterly confused, but what was going on? What is he talking about? I asked him. Muhammad interfered. Oh, he will not tell you. Otherwise you will shoot him right in his head. But I will. The doctor here, not a doctor. He is a murderer and a molester, with so much blood on his hands that adult Hitler himself is rolling in his grave. Experimenting with CHECHEN kids was his favorite thing. 15 kids vanished in his custody. Kids that he was supposed to take care of as their parents were killed by Russian army. But Doctor here did unspeakable things to them. So here I am. I have a little proposition for you, Captain. Your friend here is going to die unless you hand me the doctor and leave. Frolov is it true? He just kept crying. He was also gone. How does that sound, Captain? This time I remember everything Frolov was doing to Muhammad and how he treated people around him. I would like to say that I had some kind of reservations about the decision I was about to make, but Sergei was far more important to me than this guy. I told Frolov to get up. He wouldn't listen. I then grabbed his feet and started dragging him towards Muhammad's room. Muhammad let Sergei's neck go. He was unconscious. Now open the door, Captain. I opened the door and dragged Frolov in there. He was screaming and kicking and crying. As soon as I dragged them in, Muhammad zipped towards him so fast that I couldn't even see him. He already had them, but his neck bent against the wall. Now grab your friend, and remember, Captain, bad deeds do not go unpunished. Muhammad's smile was gone. I took a closer look at his face. You could tell Muhammad's body was dead. He was having first signs of body decomposition that I couldn't see in a camera before. Blood was slowly gashing from the gunshot by Sergei. It was absolutely horrific. But I pulled Sergei out of the room and closed the door. I looked away from the cameras. I didn't want to see what was going to happen in there. Sergei finally woke up. I told him to get up and I told him that we need to run. We ran outside. There was a snow blizzard coming down hard. We jumped into minivan parked outside. Keys were in there. Sergei was quiet. He didn't say a word. We took off driving and never looked back. In the heart of Antarctica, where the icy winds howl and the sun barely kisses the horizon, a team of U.S. Navy researchers embarked on a clandestine mission. Their objective: to explore the uncharted depths beneath the frozen continent. Little did they know that their journey would lead them to a forgotten chapter of history, one that should have remained buried forever. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Paul Whitby had a long morning that day. He had to get everything straight at his house in Woodbridge, Virginia before he had to leave his wife and his son for a long trip to a classified destination he had known about for months now. But finally, he gets to get a brief about what is it that him and his research team was going to go. He was a member of National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency, but he spent great deal of time working random projects for the Navy. This time, this was a combined task force of interagency personnel who would embark on research mission. What kind of mission? Well, he was about to find out. He drove for about an hour and parked at Pentagon parking lot and took a long walk down to a walking gate on the north side of the facility. He didn't come to Pentagon much and hated every time he did. A long walk from a parking lot to where he needs to go was at least 20 minutes at times. He hated every second of it. He was met at the gate by a Navy captain who was responsible to take him to a J-2 facility where he was supposed to get a classified briefing about the mission he was about to embark on Monday. The Navy captain offered him a coffee stop at the coffee shop inside the Pentagon. He agreed as he was already anticipating a long 2-hour brief. Paul was only one representing his research team. His deputy caught COVID a couple of days ago and couldn't make it. He was a bit nervous about what he is about to hear. He grabbed coffee and was taken to a basement into Sensitive Compartmentalized Information Facility, or SCIF. Paul had a top-secret clearance and was part of special access program that involved unconventional science. He walked into a small conference room and took a seat. There was a few people were already there. Some of them he knew, some of them he didn't. A tall, elderly gentleman walked in and sat at the head chair. He was introduced himself as a Deputy J2 and informed everyone about the briefing. Deputy J leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Paul, I hope you like cold weather because I hate it, and I'm glad I don't have to go there. Paul Whitby raised an eyebrow. Sir, where exactly are we headed? The deputy's smile was cryptic. You'll see. The Marine Major stepped forward, his uniform crisp. Team, he began, we finally secured funding for an expedition. Mr. Whitby, make sure your team's government credit cards are ready. We'll be flying quite a bit. Paul nodded, his mind racing. What kind of mission required such secrecy? He'd been with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, NOAA, for years, but this felt different. His research team had been handpicked, and the anticipation gnawed at him. Satellite intelligence, the Major continued, has been monitoring a location in New Swabia, Antarctica. You all know about the suspected Nazi facility there, a shadow we've kept an eye on for half a century. But 6 months ago, electromagnetic signatures started emanating from that icy expanse. The signature, comparable to a small city. Mike Schaffer, from the National Geospatial Agency, stood up. I'm Mike Schaffer. In November, we detected radiation and radio signals from a coastal area in New Swabia. The coordinates are in your folder. Naval intelligence approached us. They've been experiencing radio interference, especially with their submarines. The EM signature hints at nuclear fission, though not insignificant amounts. Our task, narrow down what's happening. Jessica Norman, CIA operative, introduced herself. The area in question has never been populated. Some Nazi documents from World War II hinted at New Swabia operations, but most were destroyed. The CIA doesn't believe human presence is remotely possible there. The briefing went for another hour. Paul wasn't shocked at what he had to hear. He had done missions like that before. Last one was in a remote island, in the middle of the Pacific, where CIA suspected terrorist activity. but in reality the place had some deposits of uranium. He wasn't overly concerned about mission in Antarctica. He already made up his mind that it was another waste of taxpayer money. No one in the room seemed overly concerned with underground Nazis who experimented with nuclear reactions. The Marine major leaned against the conference room table, his voice low. "Your team will be joined by 4 members of Joint Special Operations Command. They're the best in their field. Combat divers, survival experts, and linguists. Their mission: to infiltrate the new Swabia facility and gather intel." Paul's mind raced. What exactly are we dealing with? Why the secrecy? The elderly Deputy J2 leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, addressing the room, "we're dealing with something beyond our wildest imaginations." The Nazi facility was a mere cover, a smokescreen for what lies beneath. Jessica Norman raised an eyebrow. What lies beneath? The Marine major's gaze shifted to the floor plans projected on the screen. "An ancient structure," he said, "buried deep within the ice. Our intel suggests it predates human civilization. Its purpose, unknown." Mike Schaffer adjusted his glasses. "We've dubbed it Project Frostgate. The radiation spikes hint at exotic materials, ones that defy known physics. And the radio signals, they're not random. They form a pattern, a language we can't decipher." The elderly Deputy J2 leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, addressing the room, "we're dealing with something beyond our wildest imaginations." The Nazi facility was a mere cover, a smokescreen for what lies beneath. Jessica Norman raised an eyebrow. "What lies beneath?" The Marine major's gaze shifted to the floor plans projected on the screen. "An ancient structure," he said, "buried deep within the ice. Our intel suggests it predates human civilization. Its purpose, unknown." Mike Schaffer adjusted his glasses. "We've dubbed it Project Frostgate. The radiation spikes hint at exotic materials, ones that defy known physics. And the radio signals, they're not random. They form a pattern, a language we can't decipher." Paul's heart pounded. "And our mission?" The Marine major's voice dropped to a whisper. "Retrieve any artifacts, documents, or technology. But above all, find out who, or what, constructed Frostgate, and why." As the room buzzed with tension, Paul glanced at his team members, the cryptographer, the geologist, the linguist. They were about to embark on a journey that would rewrite history. Deputy J stood. "Dismissed," he said. "Pack your bags. Antarctica awaits." And so, Paul Whidbey stepped into the unknown, the icy winds of New Swabia whispering secrets that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew. Paul Whidbey stood on the tarmac, the roar of the C-130 transport plane drowning out his thoughts. Beside him, his team, each one carrying a mix of excitement and trepidation. The Joint Special Operations Command members were already aboard, their eyes sharp, their gear meticulously checked. As the plane taxied down the runway, Paul glanced at the folder in his lap. The coordinates for New Swabia were etched in his mind. Antarctica, the frozen expanse that held secrets older than civilization itself. The flight was long, the air thin. Paul's breath misted as he stared out the window, watching the icy landscape stretch to infinity. He thought of his wife, back in Woodbridge, and his son, their faces fading like distant constellations. The landing was rough, the skis of the plane biting into the snow. They disembarked, the cold hitting them like a physical force. Paul adjusted his parka, the hood shielding his face from the biting wind. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the ice. The J-2 deputy, now clad in Arctic gear, led the way. "Follow me," he said, his voice muffled by the wind. "Frostgate awaits." They trudged through the snow, the crunch of their boots echoing in the vast silence. The coordinates led them to a ridge, a jagged scar in the ice. Below, nestled within the frozen heart of New Swabia, lay their destination. The entrance was unassuming, a dark maw in the ice. Paul's headlamp cut through the darkness as they descended, the walls closing in. The air grew colder, and he felt it, the ancient pulse of Frostgate. The chamber opened into a vast cavern, a cathedral of ice. Stalactites hung like frozen chandeliers, and in the center stood the artifact, an obsidian monolith, its surface etched with symbols that defied translation. Jessica Norman stepped forward, her gloved hand tracing the markings. "This," she whispered. "It predates them. It predates us all." Mike Schaffer adjusted his spectacles, scanning the walls. "Look," he said, pointing. "Hieroglyphs, Sumerian, Egyptian, even older. And this," he gestured to a crystalline panel. "It's a star map." Paul's mind raced. "A map to what?" The Marine Major's voice echoed. "Not what, when." The room seemed to pulse, its secrets awakening. The Joint Special Operations Command members fanned out, their expertise coming alive. The cryptographer deciphered fragments of the language. The geologist studied the ice, its layers revealing eons of history. And Paul. He stepped closer to the monolith, his breath fogging the glass. He felt it, the pull of time, the weight of forgotten ages. Frostgate was a gateway to what he didn't know. But he was about to find out. As the team worked, the obsidian surface hummed. The symbols rearranged, forming a single word, a word that echoed through Paul's mind, resonating with truth and terror. Atlantis. And so, beneath the frozen wastes, they stood on the threshold of a lost world, a world that would challenge everything they believed. Paul Whitby gripped the monolith, his heart racing. The ice held its secrets, and they were about to shatter them wide open. The obsidian monolith pulsed, its surface alive with energy. Paul Whitby traced the intricate symbols, feeling their resonance in his bones. Atlantis, the word echoed through his mind like a forgotten hymn. The Joint Special Operations Command members worked tirelessly. The cryptographer, a wiry man named Dr. Elena Voss, deciphered more of the language. "It's not just a star map," she said, her breath visible in the frigid air. "It's a cosmic chronicle, a record of civilizations rising and falling across the eons." The geologist, Dr. Liam Anders, chipped away at the ice, revealing layers upon layers. "This cavern," he murmured, "it's a time capsule. Each stratum holds a different epoch." Jessica Norman, the CIA operative, stood by the crystalline panel. "We're standing at the crossroads of myth and reality," she said. "Atlantis, the lost city that sank beneath the waves. But here it is, frozen in time." Mike Schaffer adjusted his spectacles, his gaze fixed on the monolith. "We've theorized about ancient civilizations, ones predating Sumer, Egypt, even the Mayans. But this," he shook his head, "this is beyond anything we imagined." The Marine Major, his face etched with determination, stepped forward. Our mission remains unchanged, he said. Retrieve artifacts, gather data. But remember, this isn't just about history. It's about survival. Paul's mind raced. Survival. What did Frostgate guard? What cosmic forces lay dormant within its icy heart? As if in answer, the monolith shifted. The symbols rearranged, forming a pathway, a shimmering portal. Paul's breath caught. Is this? The elderly Deputy J2 nodded. A gateway, he said, to other realms, other times. Atlantis isn't a city, it's a nexus, a hub of cosmic energies. The room hummed, its walls quivering. The Joint Special Operations Command members exchanged glances. They were soldiers, scientists, agents, but now they were explorers, standing on the precipice of the impossible. Paul stepped toward the portal. The air rippled, and he glimpsed other worlds, lush jungles, crystalline cities, desolate wastelands. What lies beyond? He whispered. The Marine Major's voice was steady. Answers, truth, and perhaps our salvation. Jessica Norman gripped Paul's arm. We go together, she said, as a team. And so, they stepped through, their boots touching alien soil, their breath mingling with forgotten winds. Atlantis awaited, its mysteries unfolding. Paul Whidbey glanced back at the monolith, its surface now blank. The ice held its secrets, but they were no longer bound by time or space. They were explorers of the improbable, seekers of truth. As the portal closed behind them, Paul knew one thing: they were no longer just uncovering history. They were shaping it. Beyond the shimmering portal, the air tasted different, charged with possibility. Paul Whidbey stepped onto the alien soil, his boots sinking into dew-kissed grass. Around him stretched a landscape both familiar and otherworldly. Atlantis wasn't a city of marble spires or sunken ruins. It was a convergence, a crossroads of realities. The sky above shifted hues, as if undecided between dawn and twilight. Trees stood sentinel, their leaves whispering secrets in forgotten tongues. Jessica Norman scanned the horizon. Where are we? She asked, her voice hushed. The cryptographer, Dr. Elena Voss, adjusted her glasses. Not where, she said. When? We stepped outside time. Mike Schaffer knelt by a crystalline stream. This water, he murmured. It holds memories. Each droplet echoes epochs. Paul touched the grass, feeling its pulse. Why did the ancients build Frostgate here? The Marine Major's gaze swept the landscape. To safeguard knowledge, he said. To prevent cosmic cataclysms. And perhaps to offer hope. As they explored, they encountered beings, ethereal forms that flitted between dimensions. Some resembled humans, others defied description. They watched, curious yet aloof. Paul approached one, a luminous figure with eyes like galaxies. Who are you? The being's voice echoed in his mind. We are the custodians, it said. We tend the nexus, the hub of existence. Atlantis is but one spoke. Paul's heart raced. Why reveal this to us? The custodian gestured to the monolith, now visible through the portal. Your world teeters, it said. Fractures spread. Frostgate was a plea, a bridge between epochs. You must mend what's broken. Jessica stepped forward. How? The custodian's gaze held galaxies. Retrieve the keystone, it said, a crystal hidden across time. It binds realities. Without it, chaos. Paul understood. Frostgate wasn't just a relic. It was a cosmic lock, and they were the key. As they prepared to return, the monolith pulsed. The symbols rearranged, spelling out coordinates, across deserts, through ancient forests, beneath ocean depths. Paul met Jessica's eyes. "We follow the trail," he said, "across time." And so, they stepped back through the portal, their mission clear. Atlantis, the nexus of all things, awaited their return. As the icy winds of New Swabia embraced them, Paul glimpsed the future, a fractured earth teetering on oblivion. But they held hope, the keystone, the nexus, and the courage to mend what was broken. And so, Paul Whitby vowed, they would rewrite history, not as observers, but as architects of destiny. Keystone, a crystal of iridescent hues, lay hidden in the heart of an ancient forest. Its glow pulsed like a heartbeat, resonating with the nexus. Paul Whitby and his team followed the coordinates, their boots crunching through fallen leaves. Jessica Norman scanned the towering trees. "This place feels alive," she said, "as if time weaves through every leaf." Dr. Elena Voss adjusted her backpack. "The keystone binds realities," she reminded them. "We're not just retrieving an artifact, we're stitching the fabric of existence." Mike Schaffer squinted at the sun. "And what if we fail?" The Marine Major's jaw tightened. "Then chaos consumes all worlds." They reached the clearing, a circle of ancient oaks. The keystone hovered above a stone pedestal, its light refracting through dew-kissed air. Paul reached out, his fingers brushing the crystal's surface. And then it happened. The nexus trembled. Reality fractured. The forest twisted, its colors bleeding. Jessica's form wavered, half here, half elsewhere. "Paul," she gasped, "we're trapped." The custodians materialized, their luminous bodies flickering. "The nexus destabilizes," one said. "The keystone's absence ripples through time." Paul's mind raced. "How do we fix it?" The custodian pointed to the portal, the shimmering gateway they'd arrived through. "Escape," it said. "But the path is fractured. Each step leads to a different era." They stepped through, the forest morphing. Paul glimpsed ancient Rome, a cyberpunk Tokyo, a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Each reality bled into the next. Jessica stumbled. "We're lost." Mike's voice echoed. "We can't return." Paul's resolve hardened. "We'll forge a new path." They moved, through firestorms, ice ages, forgotten empires. The nexus pulsed, urging them forward, and then they saw it, the final portal, its light fractured like a broken hourglass. Paul touched the keystone. "This is it." The Marine Major's eyes met his. "We mend the nexus," he said, "or all worlds crumble." They stepped through, to a place beyond time. Reality knit itself, threads weaving. The keystone hummed, its light mending fractures. And then they were back. New Swabia, the icy expanse. The monolith stood before them, its symbols whole. The custodians watched. "You've saved existence," one said. Paul met Jessica's eyes, but at a cost. She nodded. "We're bound to Frostgate." The Marine Major saluted. "We guard the nexus." And so, they remained architects of destiny, custodians of the impossible. Atlantis whispered its gratitude, its secrets etched in ice. As the portal closed, Paul knew they were no longer mere explorers. They were woven into the fabric of time, a fractured thread, yet unbroken. And so, Paul Whitby vowed, they would safeguard existence, even if it meant being trapped in the nexus forever. The fractured hourglass, The keystone glowed in Paul Whidbey's palm. The Nexus pulsed, its energy urging them forward. Jessica Norman, her eyes determined, stepped toward the portal. "We can't stay trapped," she said. "We must escape." Mike Schaffer adjusted his spectacles. "But how?" The Marine Major's voice was resolute. "We mend the Nexus," he said, "or all worlds crumble." They stepped through, to a place beyond time. Reality knit itself, threads weaving. Keystone hummed, its light mending fractures. And then they were back. New Swabia, the icy expanse. The monolith stood before them, its symbols whole. The custodians watched. "You've saved existence," one said. Paul met Jessica's eyes, but at a cost. She nodded. "We're bound to Frostgate." The Marine Major saluted. "We guard the Nexus." And so, they remained architects of destiny, custodians of the impossible. Atlantis whispered its gratitude, its secrets etched in ice. As the portal closed, Paul knew they were no longer mere explorers. They were woven into the fabric of time, a fractured thread, yet unbroken. And so, Paul Whidbey vowed, they would safeguard existence, even if it meant being trapped in the Nexus forever. But then, the monolith trembled. The symbols rearranged, spelling out new coordinates. Jessica gasped. Washington, D.C. The portal opened, a gateway home. Paul stepped through, the icy winds of New Swabia replaced by the familiar buzz of the Pentagon. The Marine Major clapped his shoulder. "We've returned." And so, they emerged, back to the world they knew, yet forever changed. The Nexus had tested them, but they'd emerged stronger. Paul glanced at Jessica. "We'll keep the secret," he said. "Frostgate, Atlantis, all of it." She smiled. "Our duty." And so, they resumed their roles, scientists, agents, guardians. But now, they carried the weight of worlds. As the Pentagon's corridors stretched before them, Paul Whidbey knew the Nexus would always call, and they would answer.
I was a soldier in an army back in 2004 to 2008. I deployed to Iraq and spent 15 months there. I was severely wounded during an IED blast and had to get out once we were redeployed. During the explosion I had an out-of-body experience that I want to share with you. I myself is not a believer in supernatural, and to be honest to this day I don't know what happened to me that day. I enlisted as an infantryman, 11 Bravo, back in 2004. I was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana as my first assignment. The unit I was assigned to 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment was moving to Fort Lewis, Washington. We were given an option of either moving to Fort Lewis or staying at Fort Polk. I chose to move to Fort Lewis. At the time, Army was fielding new type of brigade, a Striker Brigade Combat Team, SBCT for short. I arrived to Fort Lewis in 2005. Checked out Seattle and Tacoma area. It was really pretty in the early winter. I still wasn't too used to the rain part, but I got used to it eventually. My unit at the time didn't even have a commander. It was being built completely from the scratch. We didn't have vehicles or even weapons. We spent most of our time doing PT and some training with rubber weapons. It was fun, since you couldn't really do much, but at the same time a lot of my friends were in Iraq getting blown up and shot at. It took long 2 years before this unit was deployed to Iraq. Our name was changed from 2nd Striker Cavalry Regiment to 4 Halves SBCT. My battalion was 4th Battalion 9th Infantry Regiment, Bravo Company or Blowtorch as we called ourselves. My battalion received fancy land warrior system. Basically everyone had some kind of a network device in him. Our gear was also different from everybody else. We were first ones to receive combat shirts, IOTVs and stuff. The land warrior system was complete trash and it didn't work most of the time. It was just an extra weight, but our commander believed in it and had us use it. By use it I really mean wear it. We ended up going to Camp Taji, just north of Baghdad. It was a barely big forward operating base, with huge empty spaces. We ended up staying in old warehouses in the east side of the FOB. Just give you a quick orientation, the FOB Taji was essentially a big square. East part of the FOB was occupied by Iraqi forces, and west side was US and coalition. The US side also was sort of divided. West side was developed. It was where everything was, dining facility, PX, local shops. The east side close to Iraqi side was mostly empty with some warehouses where we stayed and a huge tank boneyard. It was pretty cool to see all of the weaponry that was there. Anything from Chinese to Russian tanks were there. It was like a Soviet tank museum. It was fascinating. We had to drive by it on the bus every time we went to dining facility. Oh, did I mention that west side didn't have a dining facility? Yes, there were buses on Camp Taji, believe it or not. Most of my days off I spent on the west side of the FOB, getting coffee, buying bootleg movies from local shops. I didn't want to spend my days at the warehouse. We were sleeping on the double bunks nearly touching each other. The 1st Cavalry Division was staying in the nice containerized housing units or CHUs. We had to rotate to a combat outpost Tarmaya. We did rotations there every 30 days. When this happened my company was about to go there. Just to give you a little idea where it was. There is a big highway called Route Tampa or Highway 1, that went straight north to Tikrit and Mosul. We would travel that route and then there was a right turn going east to a route called Route Coyotes. It was a really bad road. There were always vehicles getting blown up there, and soldiers dying. At the end of the route right before the river, there was a town called Tarmaya. It was famous because in 1981 Israelis destroyed some nuclear site near it via airstrikes. That's about the only piece of fame this place got. We had a combat outpost there, that my battalion manned. It was just a house surrounded by HESCO barriers. There was also a sniper there that was fairly famous, but I think we caught him later. Anyway, there was always a lot of traffic on that route, resupply convoys and route clearance guys looking for rides. I was AM-240 Bravo gunner. Most of the time I stuck out of the rear hatch of the Striker. My platoon was patrolling this route periodically. This very unfortunate day we were traveling west towards Route Tampa. We were about to set up some overwatch positions along the route because brigade commander wanted to visit Tarmaya, so we were just making sure there wouldn't be any accidents. Well, as we were moving we took small arms fire from the south side of the road. We stopped and returned fire. It was our battle space, so we had to clean it up. Our platoon leader claimed that he saw where insurgents were, and he ordered my squad to flank them. We typically didn't like leaving a hardball road because strikers were flat-bottomed. If you hit a landmine or IED, it would a bad day. We had little blast blankets on the floor, but they wouldn't do much. At the time we didn't care. We infantry guys just want the action. So my squad leader took an order and told the driver to gun it around other vehicles, and take a dirt path to where he thought insurgents were. We took off driving. I was getting pumped for some action, but instead I felt the loudest blast ever. We had camo net on top of our strikers obstructing the view for snipers. When blast went off, I launched up, but got caught by the net. I blacked out, or at least I thought I did. I didn't feel pain, but I had a dream, like I was walking in some tunnel. I completely forgot who I was, and I felt peace. It was the most peaceful thing ever. I just kept walking and I walked into a light. It is hard to explain the peace I felt. All of my worries and fears had completely dissipated. I walked in the light and I ended up back home in Pennsylvania. I saw my house, and I saw my parents. They were just standing there, looking at me. I couldn't quite tell, but it looked as if they were looking at me like I died, like they were with my funeral. The physical senses were not present at this time. I couldn't hear, talk, walk. As a matter of fact, I didn't even feel like I had a body. But like I said before, I was not scared. I felt a peace. Then the picture started to get distorted. I started to see different colors, weird combinations and waves. Now I was no longer at home in Pennsylvania. I was entering a tunnel, full of vibrant colors. I was afraid to step forward. This was the first time I actually got scared. But I started walking. I walked and I walked, and a tunnel got darker and darker. Things got scarier and scarier. Finally, I was able to enter another place. It was really bright. It looked like a huge white sphere, and I was inside of it. There was a bunch of little spheres floating around erratically, and there was also a figure. Couldn't make out what that figure was at a time, but finally I saw it. It was humanoid, almost looked like a Buddha. It had some kind of a red hat. I couldn't tell its facial features, but body features were definitely human. Like I said, I didn't feel like I had a body. The figure started to approach me. I didn't know what it was going to do. It was simply floating inside the sphere. At the moment I didn't feel scared. The figure did not look threatening. But to be honest, whatever this place is, you don't even know what threat is. Things are just different, than the emotions and feelings you experience do not exist here. And like I said, at this point I did not know who I was or what I was. The figure approached me and stopped. Couldn't tell if it had eyes, or to be honest I just don't remember. I could tell that it had a nose and a mouth. At this point I felt peaceful. It was a beautiful feeling, the most beautiful feeling I've ever experienced. It's hard to explain to a person that has his or her daily issues, deals with bills, traffic, horrible bosses and other stresses of life. When you strip all of that away, all you left with is peace. Not in some bullshit hippie sense of it, but the true inner peace that frees you from burdens of this world. The figure looked at me and then it crossed its arms like it was hugging itself. Immediately I was teleported. Now I was in a different place. I'm not entirely sure what that place was, but it was absolutely stunning. It was like I was on the scene of Harry Potter. Massive, beautiful mountains with fog rolling down, and shining sun right in your face. I guess you can call it paradise or heaven, but I didn't see no angels or gods. I just felt peace and happiness. I stood there for what felt like forever. Suddenly I gained ability to move. It felt like I was in the God mode in some video game. I just kept floating around that place, looking at everything, enjoying its beauty. I didn't have sense of time anymore, so I have no idea how long it's really been, or who I was before this. It was a very strange feeling of being free. Suddenly I started to feel like I was drowning. Feeling of fear returned to me. I slowly started to remember who I was and what happened. For a second I thought it was back home in Pennsylvania. But then I started to remember. I remembered that I was a soldier. And I was in Iraq in a war zone. I just couldn't remember past that. I couldn't remember what happened to me. All of a sudden I was able to open my eyes a little bit. I started to hear gunshots. And I have a machine gun blasting away. It felt like it was really far away from me, but it was getting closer and closer and louder, more conscious I became. I still couldn't really move. I couldn't feel my legs or my right hand. To be quite honest, I didn't even care for feeling it. But memories started to come back, and feeling of my extremities also came back to me. I finally remembered who I was and what happened. Then I felt a huge rush of energy. I got up and ran down the ramp of the striker. I just kept running until I saw some cover. In my hands I had an M4 carbine. That was my secondary weapon. I saw the insurgents out in distance and I attempted to engage him. I kept squeezing the trigger but nothing was coming out. I mean like nothing. Then I saw two of my buddies just standing there. By standing there I meant like they stood in the line of fire. They were motionless. I also saw other squads maneuvering towards us while engaging insurgents. I saw insurgents run away. I heard of not patch out in a distance, but I was still confused about what was happening. Finally 3rd Squad Striker was able to get to ours. Ram dropped and they ran out. Then I noticed that the ramp on my striker was actually up. How the fuck did I get out? I started to yell at him to let him know where I was, but nobody was responding. I even ran Thorson, but it was like I was not even there. The guys from my squad, they were just standing there. Were very still. I saw them looking at me with blank eyes, like lifeless eyes. The guys from the other squad were able to climb up inside a striker and emergency drop the ramp since all of the vehicle power was off after the blast. That's when I was in YHE state of shock. I saw my body being pulled out by the guys. What is going on here? I moved towards my body, and I just stood there looking at myself, trying to rationalize what was happening. I died. Yes, I died, and God or whatever it was showing me the proof, I thought. I saw the guys from my squad looking at their bodies as well. It's like we were all waiting confirmation. When they saw their bodies being pulled out, they both started walking slowly in the same direction. It's like some invisible magnet was pulling them in. I didn't feel anything yet. Things started to slow down around me. I just felt that feeling of peace again. Both of my squad members disappeared at this point. I saw my squad leader being pulled out. He conscious and alive. I felt kind of bad for him, I don't know why. Then I got yanked out of that state. Everything went dark, and I started feeling the pain. It was horrible. I heard medic yell, "He has a pulse." But my vision was blurry, and again I didn't remember who I was. My identity was stripped away as my body was dying. I fell unconscious again, and then again, until finally I woke in the hospital. Nurse told me I was in Germany, and that I was okay. A chaplain came and talked to me too, asking how I was doing. I told him that I don't remember much. He told me that 2 of my squad mates passed as a result of this blast. Everything I said before I didn't remember at all. It all came back to me after I went to Peru and consumed some ayahuasca. That brought all of these memories back. And now I remembered everything. I'm still wondering if souls of my buddies are still there patrolling streets of Tarmaya and wondering what their next mission is, hoping that they are coming home alive to see their friends and family, hoping to go to college one day and get married. However, looking at it now, maybe death is not such a horrible thing. Maybe it's still life but in a different form. I don't know, but I hope that my buddies got to their heaven. And they are happy looking down at us. Sometimes when you are in the military, you get caught up in the routine. You think the world revolves around training exercises and deployments. Sometimes you forget that there are things out there, which no one can explain, and the military exercises will never prepare for things you might have to encounter. Well, there is a story of a U.S. Marine who has experienced something in the mountains of California. I will not name him. Only thing I can say is that he is a 0311 stationed in Camp Pendleton, California with 3rd Battalion 1st Marines. First, I'm a Marine rifleman stationed at Camp Pendleton, California. I live being here quite frankly. I am from Utah, so proximity to my parents in Las Vegas made it that much better. This is my first duty station, and so far I quite enjoyed it. Sure, things can get hard from time to time, but nothing that I can't handle. My battalion just recently completed its Marine Expeditionary Unit tour. Unfortunately, I didn't get to participate because I just arrived. Let me tell you, being new guy in a recently redeployed unit is not easy, but I trained hard and learned what I could from the guys that just did a deployment. Anyways, Marine Corps does not like to be idle. About 2 months after redeployment, we were getting ready for another deployment to Afghanistan. A part of preparation for Afghanistan, units typically had to conduct an exercise at Marine Mountain Warfare Training Center. If you don't know what it is, I suggest you look it up. Some people say it's in Bridgeport, California, but that's not quite right either. It's literally in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, pretty close to Yosemite National Park. But we were still about 2 months out from going over there. Meanwhile, we kept going to the ranges and doing a lot of road marches. About 2 weeks out, I ran into a buddy of mine who I went to SOI with at Chow Hall. We sat down and talked for a little while. I asked him how he was doing and told me that his unit just got done at MWTC, and that it was crazy. They had a Marine go crazy, and another one completely vanished. Apparently they are still looking for him. Anyway, he said the elevation there is a bit much, and not everyone can handle it. I asked him how he felt the whole time, and he told me that there was a lot of shit that outright creeped him out. He told me that when he was on the night watch, he kept hearing his name being called in the dark, but he was the only one up in his whole platoon, and rest of the company was a good distance away to come over there to fuck with him. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just discounted the whole thing as lack of oxygen. About a week out, we began packing our containers and gear. We received a lot of briefings, one specifically mentioning a missing Marine. His name was Lance Corporal Anderson. Apparently he just left his night watch and disappeared. They kept trying to follow his footprints in the snow, but they just disappeared at one point. We were briefed that search will continue while we are there. It shouldn't interrupt our training in any way, shape or form. Early in the morning on November 15th, we got on the buses and headed over to Bridgeport. It was a very enjoyable ride, very scenic with breathtaking transition from desert to woods and mountains. We finally arrived late at night. Company First Sergeant held a formation and assigned us our barracks space. I was dead tired. I just threw my sleeping bag on my bunk and collapsed. We woke up at 0500, and our surprise, the commander wanted us to do PT and start getting acclimated. I scrambled to pull out my PFT uniform and running shoes and get in formation. It took me so long to get ready that I didn't shave. My corporal tore me a new one for not doing that. Like I said before, these guys just got back from deployment and they weren't playing around. After the miserable 6-mile run in my life, we got done with PFT and finally got to shower. To be quite honest, all I wanted to is collapse on my bunk and sleep another couple of hours, but we had a formation before we had to download our duffel bags from our platoon container. The whole first I was just dragging ass from the altitude. Finally at 2200 we got done with all of the preparations and set up to start our exercise. Right as I hit the bunk and began passing out, my team leader shook my leg and told me that I have a radio watch at the company operations center at 0300. Oh, how fucking great. I woke up 4 hours later and dragged myself to a building where company operations center was. All I had to do was an hourly radio check with battalion COC, so I just kept napping in between. Suddenly I heard my name called. I fell of the chair and hit my head on the floor. I quickly got up thinking it was our company first sergeant walking in, but there was no one there. I walked outside and only thing I saw was a Marine smoking a cigarette few hundred yards by India Company's COC. There is no way it was him, I thought. He doesn't even know my name. Whatever. Probably a dream. I decided to smoke a cigarette. My shift was about to be over in 20 minutes. Finally first saw a Marine walking from the barracks area. He was walking fast, little too fast for 0400. Probably a boot, I thought. As he was approaching I noticed that it was no one I know. He didn't have his headgear, and he had a desert pattern uniform instead of woodland-like rest of the battalion. He kept walking towards my COC, but then he made an abrupt left turn and began running. I caught a glimpse of his face, and his eyes were wide open as well as his mouth. Damn, I thought, who the fuck is this dude? He just kept running toward the mountains. I just kept looking at him. For a second I wondered if it was a missing Marine from 1st Recon. But I was hesitant to yell out. What if it was some crazy officer doing his pre-PFT? I didn't think anything of it, and I went inside the COC. About 15 minutes later my relief showed up and told me that I still had to do PFT. Great, I thought. I will be exhausted beyond imagination at the end of the day. I didn't get to sleep because all of the early birds in the barracks began waking up talking and making shit tons of noise. I just put my PFT uniform on and just went outside at 5:45. Buddy of mine was giving me shit about me forgetting to shave again. This time I went under the radar. After PFT, I decided to skip chow to get some sleep. Later I found that to be a very dumb idea. I racked out until about 0830. My squadmates left me alone as they were too busy bullshitting and smoking outside of the barracks bay. The third day was consisted of getting ready to use our cold weather equipment. We were having classes on cold weather equipment all day. During the whole time I kept passing out. Finally my team leader took me outside for some extra PFT. Let's just say it didn't help, and I just decided to stand up for a class instead of sitting down. I was glad the day ended. I saw my bunk and I just crashed. The elevation was really kicking my ass. The third day I felt little better. My platoon commander decided that he wanted to repeat 6-mile run just to see how everyone felt. We all were slowly getting acclimated and no one fell out of the run this time. We only had 2 days left before heading into mountains. We spent the day packing up our gear and doing things like laundry. If you ever done laundry at the training center, you know how painful it could be. I sat there waiting for washing machine to free up along with other 100 or so Marines. There are only 10 washers and dryers, so I just sat there on my phone trying unsuccessfully to catch some signal to call my girlfriend. While I was sitting there I overheard 2 Marines talking. One of them said that he heard his name being called several times while he was guarding ammo, but there was no one there and how freaked out he was. He also said that he saw a figure walking back and forth on the highway, and the figure just disappeared. I decided to join the conversation with my 2 cents. You can tell that the Marine was happy to hear my story because it confirmed that he wasn't crazy. Damn, I thought, how come we both heard and saw the same thing? Well, a washer opened up and I dumped my dirty uniforms into it and went to get some food at the chow hall. The whole time I felt creeped out by what I have heard. I spent rest of the day packing up my rucksack and a duffel bag. The next day after PFT, we put our duffel bags into our containers, since we weren't going to use any of the extra crap in it out in the mountains. We had a movement rehearsal and few more classes on mountain survival techniques. We were set to step out at 0200. The plan was to ruck up to an assembly area on the slope of the mountain for 4 hours and then set up a patrol base where we would spend 3 days applying what we learned. After that we would conduct land navigation training and some tactical stuff as well. And the second week we would do an actual operation called mountain ascent. We would ruck another 20 miles up the mountains where we would establish another patrol base, and then we would switch out to play OPFOR and funnel all of the platoons and companies through STX lanes. STX stands for Situation Training Exercise, meaning we would be given a scenario or mission we would have to accomplish. I didn't get any sleep that night. I tried, but waking at up 2300 wasn't very appealing. We cleared out and cleaned our barracks and headed for a formation. My squad leader checked everybody's gear, making sure our night vision was operational and we had enough gear. It started to rain, meaning it was going to turn into snow higher we go up. Let's just say that part was beyond miserable. We couldn't wait to start moving. Temperature dropped to about 35 degrees, and we were just standing there. Finally we stepped out. The initial walk wasn't too bad. We kept a good pace and kept climbing up the mountains. The movement was only about 12 kilometers, but due to elevation it felt like it was forever. We took our first break 3 hours later. It was still dark and snowing, creating a magnificent scenery. You could see lights of a cantonment area in the background of the mountains. As sun came up, clouds slowly cleared out and we got some sun. We arrived at our assembly area around 0700. Everyone collapsed from exhaustion. We were told to pull out our MREs and eat our breakfast. All I wanted to do was sleep at that point. Rest of the day we spent setting up our sleeping areas and getting our security perimeters established. Our squad leader put out some notes regarding land navigation training we were about to do. It was going to start at 0100 and end at 09, giving us 8 hours to find our points. Company Operations Center was set up on the back on the MTBR, a huge dump truck that followed us the whole time we were walking. We were issued maps and list of grids to find. We were broken up in the groups of 3 in light of what happened to other unit who did thus individual and ended missing a Marine. I got stuck with my team leader and another guy from another team. After a long safety brief we stepped off. The first point was about 1500 meters from us on the slope of a mountain. We kept walking in the dark, luckily without rucksacks, just weapon, body armor and a helmet. There were Marines everywhere spread put throughout the area. There was plenty of moonlight as well. I was the last one to walk in our small 3-man line. Suddenly I hear my name being called again. I stopped and yelled at my corporal. I thought it was him. He came up to me and scolded me for violating the noise discipline. He also said that he never called out my name and to just shut the fuck up from now on. Well, that was creepy. We found 4 points and returned to our patrol base around 0900. I collapsed from exhaustion and ate my MRE. We were told to take a quick nap until noon. We had some more training to do that day. I quickly passed out. I had a very vivid nightmare. We were walking at night and I had to turn around. When I did, first saw a Marine with same desert pattern marpat standing right behind me looking at me. His face was pale like he was dead and his eyes were completely black. I woke up abruptly and looked around. It was still sunny. Bunch of Marines were doing the same thing I was doing. sleeping on their rucks. I looked at my watch, it was 10:30. I didn't want to go back to sleep. I just sat there thinking about what was happening to me. At 1300 we had a quick formation, where our gunny put out some notes regarding the following few days. We spent rest of the day cleaning our weapons and doing some small unit tactics training. For night I was put on the watch at the entrance to company assembly area. I was given a radio and told to call anybody coming or out to the COC. Of course, me being a new guy, the first got stuck with 0200 shift. Adding to the misery, it started to snow right before I had to report. I walked over to where I was supposed to be to find a lonely Marine standing there with a radio in his hand. Finally, he whined, "Here is the radio. Just do a radio check with COC every 15 minutes, otherwise you'll go crazy." He handed me the radio and quickly disappeared. Since everybody was sleeping, I pulled out a pack of cigarettes, knowing that it was a wrong thing to do. I lit one up and stood there looking at the scenery. As snow started picking up, it was becoming more difficult to see. After about 30 minutes I started hearing footsteps in the snow. They were very abrupt, like someone kept walking really fast and then would stop. I kept trying to call out to whoever was there, but there was no response. Suddenly, I heard my name being called again. I could tell that it was not coming from inside off in the assembly area. I froze in fear, was paralyzed for a second. "Joe, come here, over here." I heard again. The voice calling me didn't sound human, it was almost otherworldly. Fuck that, I thought. I finally gathered enough courage to run towards COC. I took off running and immediately tripped and fell. "Joe, I am over here, I need help, please," the voice kept on talking. I got up and took off running. I couldn't see the COC, so I just kept running in the direction of the sound of the generator. Suddenly, I came to dead stop. Right on the front of me I see the same Marine I saw in my dream. He was just standing there very still. He was dressed in the desert marpat. His name tag was missing. His face was pale white, and his eyes were completely dark. He was standing there and looking at me. I felt paralyzed. I closed my eyes and started running through where I thought he was standing. I tripped and fell again. I got up and kept running. My adrenaline levels were probably off the charts. The whole time I heard voices. I kept hearing, "I just need help, come and talk to me." Finally I heard loud sounds of a generator. I ran up to it and started banging on the gate on the back of the truck. One of the NCOs opened up the tarp opening. "What the fuck, Marine?" he yelled at me. "Get the fuck in the truck." I climbed up on the back and started talking. I said, "Staff Sergeant, there is a guy out there, his eyes are all black and shit." I didn't know what the fuck to do. "Shut the fuck up, devil dog, what did you smoke? Sit down here and wait." He got out of the truck and went to go get a corpsman. I was shivering and shaking the whole time. Company finally showed up after 30 minutes. He pulled out his flashlight to take a closer look at me. He checked my eyes and my pulse, and blood pressure. "Dude, I don't what the fuckness going on here with you, but you need to chill the fuck out. Your blood pressure is off the charts." The staff sergeant and first sergeant climbed up in the truck. First sergeant didn't seem happy whatsoever. "If you smoked some shit, Marine, you need to tell us now," he said. "Sir, I didn't smoke anything at all but a Marlboro Light. I'm telling you, there is some dude." I started crying. Finally they saw that I wasn't faking. "Okay, get him down to a clinic downhill first thing in the morning and see if them can drug test him," he said to Staff Sergeant. "Roger that," he responded. I sat in truck until sun came up. Finally I was told by our corpsman to grab my rucksack and leave my weapon in nuke vision with my platoon. I had to sit there and wait for a truck to take me down to clinic at cantonment area. Corpsman told me that first sergeant also wants a urinalysis test done on me. He was very convinced that I was a druggie. Whatever, I thought, I know I didn't take anything. I was sitting there waiting for a truck to show up to pick me up and take me back for about 3 hours. I just kept dozing off, and having nightmares and sleep awakenings. Finally I got heard an NCO yelling at me to get in the truck. Ride back was fast, maybe 20 minutes or so. I was told to drop off my gear in the barracks and report to the clinic. I was seen by civilian physician assistant who was grumpy and skeptical the whole time. You could tell he was not believing a single word coming out of mouth. Finally he said, "Okay Marine, here is the deal. There are 2 scenarios here. You either took something that you aren't telling me, or you are having some kind of psychotic outbreak. Neither one of these I can deal with right now. I'll have to send you down to Bridgeport. There's a small clinic there that can give you a UA test and psych eval, but you'll spend a night here because it's too late to take you down there. So report here at 07 tomorrow so we can take you down." I was slightly excited for spending a night away from the mountains and snow. I went back to the barracks, hitting a chow hall on the way back. I felt great and free from all of the judgment I was getting back at my unit. I collapsed on my bunk and started watching YouTube videos. Since everybody was gone, the lonely cell tower at MWTC was finally at the full blast. Before I noticed I was out, I didn't have any nightmares this time. I woke up at 05:45 and went to take a shower. There was about 5 more Marines back in the barracks. Some got hurt during an initial march up the mountain, some were hypothermic. It felt good not to be alone, but this early, in was only 1 up, I walked out to smoke a cigarette. At 06:45 I walked over to aid station and waited. Some sergeant told me to wait here while he is getting a van ready. We finally left. It felt great to be able to leave confines of MWTC and go back out to civilization. The NCO wasn't very talkative, but he did offer to stop at the gas station to get some snacks, an offer I gladly accepted. He dropped me off and told me to call aid station when I was done. I was immediately taken to take a urinalysis test, and then I sat there waiting for a psychologist to show up. The psychologist was a nice native lady. She carefully listened to my experience and took notes. Suddenly, she asked me, "You said you were from Utah. Do you know if you have any relatives that are native?" The question caught me off guard, and I didn't quite know how to answer it. I had to think for a second. My great-grandma was from a reservation in northern Arizona, so I told her I was part, but I don't know the percentage. She then said, "Okay, I will give you some medicine for anxiety." She seemed very concerned, and I began to wonder if I was really losing my shit. I got prescribed some anxiety medication, and before I walked out, she told me that I should seek some spiritual help as well, that there are things out there that conventional medicine can't help with. I didn't really know what she meant by that, but it stuck in my head for some reason. I called back and got picked up in about 2 hours. I got back to MWTC, and was told to get ready to go back out first thing tomorrow morning. Company was getting ready to conduct movement to higher level where the platoon STX lanes will start. Damn, I thought, I had a nice break, now it's time to go back. I wasn't looking forward to it. I was expecting to get mocked and dismissed at every corner. Ride up was uneventful. I reported back to company COC. The first sergeant looked pissed off at something and took it out on me almost immediately. He said, "If some shit comes back positive, I am going to the brig." Damn, I thought, what a great welcome back. I went down to my platoon and grabbed my weapon and nods. No one wanted to talk to me. Everyone seemed exhausted and not very talkative. Naturally, I started isolating. I overheard Marines joking about what I told the duty NCO that night as the word quickly spread throughout the company. We were scheduled to step out to conduct mountain ascent at 0900 the next day. Before we stepped out, I was leaning against my rucksack eating my MRE for breakfast, and doing hot coffee that was delivered to us in the morning, when a Marine from another platoon walked up towards me and sat down. I knew him. He had a Hispanic last name, and I never really talked to him before. He sat right next to me and started talking. "Hey man, what's up? I heard all that shit people are saying about you." I said, "I know. I don't know what the fuck I saw, man. Probably elevation or some shit." He then asked, "Are you Navajo?" Again, I was a bit startled by the question. "I think I'm part, but I'm not too sure." "Damn bro, you don't even know your heritage," he continues. "What you saw, man, it's called a skinwalker. It's an evil spirit that possesses people, but not any kind of people. You have to have native blood flowing through you. It don't want no white people." I was lost for words. Damn, finally someone who believed me. He began explaining that you have to go through some ceremonial shit so the skinwalker doesn't know who you are. "Listen man, I'm going to my reservation for Christmas leave. My uncle is a shaman and he knows how to deal with this shit. You know what I'm saying? Come with me to Arizona and we'll take care of that." I was hesitant to agree, and I told him that I will think about it. The company started the movement up the mountain. Higher we went up, harder to walk it got. Finally we got to our next assembly area. It was a slope of a mountain covered with snow. We started setting up our houches. This time my tram leader didn't put me on night duty, which was great. We were told that at 0600 our platoon has its first STX lane. Everything was uneventful. I didn't hear any more voices and my anxiety seemed like it was down. Until 2 days before an end of the exercise. We had a night STX lane where we had to walk up YHE Mountain and knock out a makeshift bunker with a machine gun nest. I was the last one in the formation, pulling rear security. We began walking at midnight, hoping to finish the last STX lane. We were about 5 to 10 meters between us. I was just walking up when I heard, "Halt." I stopped and took a knee, trying to look around. I was trying to look for a guy ahead of me, but I couldn't see him. I sat there for a few minutes before I realized something was off. Suddenly, I lost my sense of direction. I heard, "Over here. Come here." I started moving towards the voice and I ended up falling off the slope of the mountains. I screamed out, and I just kept rolling down, which seemed like it was forever. I felt sharp pain in my thigh and knee as I was falling, and I hit face on the rock, breaking my nose. I finally stopped rolling. My back twisted so many times I thought I broke my spine. I tried looking up, but an overwhelming pain took right back down. Suddenly I saw him again. He was just standing there looking at me with the same dead eyes. I couldn't scream. I just closed my eyes and kept telling self it wasn't real. But somehow he was still talking to me, like telepathically. "Joe, just look at me. You don't have to be scared." I finally was able to let off a scream, but in reality it was more of a moan. Right side of my body was still somewhat functional and I was able to turn on my flashlight. I closed my eyes again, and I lost my consciousness. I woke up when it was still dark. I could tell that I was getting hypothermic just laying there on the cold ground. The skinwalker was gone. I was finally able to scream. I let out a scream for help, and I heard voices up on the trail. It was my squad mates looking for me. They got down to where I was. The platoon commander got down there as well. "How in the fuck did you end up here?" I told you motherfuckers to watch your step. He called a 9-line medevac request on the radio. The corpsman was able to come down as well. He had a thermal blanket with him. I got wrapped in it. Until helicopters showed up, they hoisted me up and evacuated me to a hospital in Modesto. I don't remember how I got there. But I spent 12 days at the Naval Hospital on Camp Pendleton recovering from my injuries. I was able to come back to my unit right before Christmas leave block. My injuries were too severe for me to continue train up with my unit. So I just took convalescent leave until my medical discharge process begins mid-January. The Corps was having none of what I had to say, but I'm glad I don't have to go back to those mountains.